Story 1.
I realized that there is no safety anywhere. No matter where I went, no matter how hard I tried to keep myself safe, at any second disaster could happen to me or someone close to me. A sobering thought, isn't it? Last year, in our very own country, over 400,000 people vanished without a trace. They were just like you and me, going about their everyday lives. They left for work, strolled down their local streets, returned from a casual date, and then, poof, they were gone. They became part of a harrowing statistic, a mystery unsolved. Some of these people were fortunate enough to be found, but a significant number remain missing. Their stories, their lives, hang in an uncertain limbo. And when you break down these numbers, it's even more startling. Globally, we're looking at 2 to 3 individuals disappearing every minute. Me and my wife, we too could have been part of this horrifying statistic. It was a cold winter evening, the kind that chills you to the bone and freezes you from the inside out. Emily and I were on our way back from her friend's birthday party, held at a quaint country house. It was one of those lavish events that you read about in glossy magazines but seldom get to attend. The house, a sprawling Victorian manor, was decked out in festive lights, casting an ethereal glow against the thickening snow. Emily was radiant that night, her pregnancy giving her a glow that even the harsh winter couldn't dull. She was 9 months along, the baby due any day now. Truth be told, I had my reservations about making the trip, especially with her so close to her due date. But she had been cooped up for far too long, and the prospect of seeing her freed had brought a spark back to her eyes that I hadn't seen in weeks. The ride to the country house was uneventful, but as the evening wore on, a small snowstorm began to brew. I watched with a certain trepidation as the snowflakes started to fall, each one seeming to dance and twirl before settling on the ground. By the time we decided to leave, a thick blanket of snow had enveloped the landscape. Driving back was a challenge. The snowstorm was picking up, the flakes swirling in the headlights, creating a mesmerizing yet disorienting tunnel of white. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white with the effort of keeping the car steady. Emily, meanwhile, was in a world of her own. Throughout the journey, she kept complaining about how much she had eaten. "I think I've overdone it this time," she chuckled, rubbing her swollen belly. Everything was just so delicious. Her laughter was a welcome distraction from the unnerving journey, but I couldn't help but worry about her well-being. I remembered the doctor's advice about watching her diet, especially in these final stages of the pregnancy. As I navigated the car through the increasingly heavy snow, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. The road was deserted, the only sound the howl of the wind and the crunch of snow under the tires. It was as if we were the only 2 souls brave enough, or foolish enough, to venture out in this weather. Then, in an instant, everything changed. There was a loud crash, a jolt that sent a shockwave through the car. We hit something, or something hit us. The moments following the accident were a blur of confusion and pain. The crash had shattered the stillness of the night, throwing our world into disarray. I remember the impact. It was sudden, violent, and all-consuming. There was a loud, jarring noise that pierced through the quiet, followed by an overwhelming sense of disorientation. As the car skidded and flipped, my mind raced with fear and confusion. The world spun around me, a chaotic whirl of snow, metal, and glass. I felt my body being thrown about like a rag doll, helpless against the forces that were now in control. The sharp sting of pain as my head hit the side window was the first real sensation I registered. A warm trickle of blood made its way down my forehead, a stark contrast to the cold that was seeping in through the shattered windows. The airbag deployed with a force that felt like a punch to the face, leaving my nose broken and throbbing. Then, darkness. In that darkness, I drifted in and out of consciousness, caught in the grip of a heavy, unsettling dream. I was in a pit, surrounded by snakes. Their hissing filled my ears, a sound as menacing as their poised, ready-to-strike postures. The fear was palpable, gripping me with icy fingers. But it was the sight of Emily behind me that truly terrified me. Her screams for help echoed in my ears, a desperate plea that I was powerless to answer. "James, don't leave me," she cried, over and over, her voice lissaid with fear and desperation. Just as the snakes began to attack, one sinking its fangs into my arm, a sharp pain jolted me awakey. It wasn't a snake, but a hand, tugging insistently at my arm. I opened my eyes, trying to adjust to the darkness. Emerging from the darkness of unconsciousness, I found myself enveloped in a cold, damp world. The chill of the night air bit into my skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the blood trickling down my forehead. I was lying flat on my back, disoriented, trying to piece together the fragments of my shattered thoughts. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, a small, shadowy figure materialized in my blurry vision. It was a girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, a complete stranger to me. Her presence was as bewildering as it was sudden. She had been the one to rouse me from my stupor, her small hands tugging at my arm with a sense of urgency. Pain racked my body as I attempted to move. My head throbbed with a relentless ache, a reminder of the collision that had thrown our lives into chaos. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the world spinning uncontrollably as I struggled to find my bearings. Despite the overwhelming discomfort, I forced myself to a sitting position. The cold dampness of the ground seeped through my clothes, intensifying the sense of misery that enveloped me. But the pain and the cold were secondary to the sudden, gripping fear that took hold of me. Emily, my wife, was missing. She had been right beside me before the crash, but now there was no sign of her. Panic surged through me as I called out her name, my voice echoing into the night. But there was no answer, only the silence of the dark landscape and the girl's anxious gaze. The realization that I had lost Emily filled me with a terror I had never known. Where is she? What has happened to her? The questions haunted me, each one amplifying my fear. My attention shifted back to the mysterious girl. Who was she? Where had she come from in the dead of night, in the middle of nowhere? She stood silently, her eyes wide and unblinking, offering no answers, only adding to the eerie atmosphere that surrounded us. Limping, with every step sending a jolt of pain through my leg, I approached the silent, mud-covered girl. She was a small, fragile figure in the eerie darkness, dressed in a pink jacket and jeans, her hair braided into pigtails. Her face, streaked with tears, was a picture of vulnerability and fear. She sat huddled, her knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around them in a protective embrace. I tried to communicate, asking her name if she was hurt, but she just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, offering no response. There was an unsettling air about her silence, but my mind was too preoccupied with finding Emily to ponder over it. I turned my attention back to my surroundings, trying to make sense of where we were. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the outlines of our location slowly materialized, revealing a place both desolate and forlorn. I found myself in what seemed like an abandoned structure. The air was thick with dampness and a pungent mix of rust and mustiness. It clung to my clothes, seeping into my skin, sending chills down my spine. The whole place felt like it had been forgotten by time, a relic of a past long gone. The sound of dripping water was the only noise that broke the silence, its persistent echo reverberating through the space. It amplified the loneliness and neglect that seemed to permeate every corner of this forsaken place. Light was scarce, barely more than a few ghostly rays filtering through sparse cracks and crevices in the ceiling. These faint beams cast elongated shadows that danced upon the walls, creating an atmosphere of oppressive reclusiveness. The realization that I had no idea where I was hit me with a sense of panic. This wasn't just a simple accident. We had somehow ended up in this desolate, forgotten place, far removed from the world I knew. I decided to push forward, guided by the faint draft of cold air that seemed to whisper of an exit. I motioned for the girl to follow, my movements gentle and deliberate, mindful not to frighten her. She rose, her movements hesitant, and together we ventured deeper into the unknown. Each step we took on the cold, damp concrete floor echoed ominously through the cavernous space. The sound was jarring, a harsh reminder of our unsettling surroundings. The concrete was slippery, treacherous, and I found myself struggling to maintain balance, my injured leg protesting with each step. The walls of this subterranean maze were a testament to years of neglect. They were coated with a patina of grime and moss, the legacy of decades, perhaps centuries. The air was heavy with the mustiness of decay, a tangible reminder of the passage of time that seemed to have halted in this forsaken place. As we moved, the dim light cast eerie shadows across our path. Curved pipes, distorted by time and neglect, loomed like specters. The old brick walls were a canvas for the creeping mold, adding to the horror movie-like ambience of our surroundings. Here and there, the remnants of what once were grates and ladders lay broken and rusted, relics of a bygone era. The realization dawned on me slowly, with a creeping sense of dread. We were in an abandoned sewer system. The thought was chilling, not just for the location itself, but for the flood of questions it unleashed in my mind. How did I end up here? Who, or what, had brought me to this desolate place? My thoughts raced, each more frantic than the last. The possibility that someone had dragged me here, unconscious and vulnerable, was terrifying. The implications were sinister, a hint of malicious intent that I couldn't begin to comprehend. But amidst this whirlwind of confusion and fear, one question stood out, sharp and urgent. Where was Emily? My wife, in the vulnerable state of late pregnancy, was still missing. The thought of her alone and afraid in this dark, damp hell was unbearable. It overshadowed every other concern, every other fear. The journey through the damp, oppressive corridors of the sewer led us to a large, open room. Its cold walls rose around us, forming a barrier that seemed to isolate us from the rest of the world. The room felt like a forgotten chamber, hidden deep beneath the surface, untouched by time. In front of me, a crucial decision awaited. The path split into two distinct directions, each entrance beckoning into its own unknown darkness. To the left, droplets of moisture hung in the air, catching what little light there was and shimmering like ghostly markers. They seemed to suggest a path frequently traveled, perhaps even recently. To the right, the passage was devoured by an impenetrable darkness, a void that seemed to lead straight into the bowels of the earth. My head ached with a relentless throb, a constant reminder of the crash and its aftermath. Each step I took was slow, measured, my mind clouded by dizziness and pain. I could feel the stickiness of blood on my forehead as I ran trembling fingers over the wound. It was a stark reminder of the reality of my situation. I stood there, caught in a moment of deep indecision. The two entrances loomed before me, each holding its own secrets, its own dangers. Which path should I choose? Where could Emily be? Was she waiting for me down one of these dark corridors? The weight of this decision pressed heavily up on me. Choosing the wrong path could mean wandering even deeper into this labyrinthine nightmare, further away from finding my wife. The girl, still silent, stood beside me. Her presence was an enigma, unsettling in its quietness. Yet, in that moment, my primary concern was the choice at hand. I couldn't afford to make a mistake in this unforgiving subterranean world. I scanned the entrances again, searching for any sign, any clue that might guide me. But there was nothing. Only the steady drip of water to the left and the oppressive silence to the right. The decision was mine alone to make. As I stood at the fork in the path, lost in contemplation, the little girl suddenly pulled at my sleeve with an urgency that jolted me. Pain shot through my injured shoulder, sending a wave of sharp, agonizing stabs through my arm. I turned to her, noticing the panic in her movements as she twisted her head, her eyes wide with fear. It was clear she was trying to communicate something desperately important. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper in the oppressive silence of the sewer. The girl continued to tug at my sleeve, her gaze fixated on something in the darkness. She opened her mouth, trying to make a sound, but what came out was a muted moan, a sound filled with distress but devoid of words. The realization hit me. She was unable to speak. Her mooing was pathetic and disturbing. Then, abruptly, the silence was shattered by the sound of muffled footsteps echoing from somewhere behind us. My body tensed, every sense heightened as I strained to identify the source. The footsteps grew louder, closer, sending a wave of panic through me. Without warning, the air was filled with a terrifying, deafening roar. It was a sound so primal and ferocious that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the sewer. The roar of a beast, it resonated through the corridors, reverberating off the walls and penetrating deep into my very being. Fear, raw and unfiltered, coursed through me. In that moment of sheer terror, instinct took over. I grabbed the girl's hand and bolted into one of the entrances, not waiting to see what was behind us. My mind screamed a single command, "Run!" and I obeyed, pushing through the pain and fatigue that threatened to overwhelm me. We plunged into the darkness, the unknown path ahead of us offering the only chance of escape. The sound of our footsteps echoed in the narrow passageway. a frantic rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. The oppressive darkness of the sewer seemed to close in around us as we continued our weary journey. The cold, damp walls were our constant companions, unchanging and unforgiving. My body ached with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm me, each step a testament to the sheer will to keep moving. Eventually, the pain and exhaustion became too much to bear. I had to stop, my lungs burning for air, my muscles screaming in protest. The girl, her small frame shaking with fatigue, collapsed to her knees. We were both spent, our bodies pushed to their limits. Leaning heavily against the icy wall, I gasped for breath, each inhale a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of strength. The beast's roar still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the terror we had escaped. But it was more than fear for my own safety that plagued me. It was the agonizing worry for Emily. Where was she in this hellish labyrinth? Was she safe? The thought of losing her, coupled with the fear of what might be lurking in the darkness, was almost too much to bear. Where to go? This question circled in my mind, an obsessive mantra that offered no answers. The vastness of the unknown weighed heavily on me, its oppressive presence magnifying my anxiety. My wounds, cold and painful, were a constant reminder of my vulnerability. The creeping suspicion that I might be bleeding internally added to my growing despair. Suddenly, a fit of coughing racked my body, and to my horror, I saw blood in my hand. The realization that my injuries might be more serious than I had thought was a red flag, urging me to move, to find a way out of this nightmare. I strained my ears, listening intently for any sign of the beast. But instead of footsteps, I heard something else, a soft, muffled noise. It sounded like crying. The girl beside me began to make her mute, moaning sounds again, pulling in the direction of the noise. Despite my fear and exhaustion, I followed her lead, moving with as much caution as I could muster. We left the corridor and emerged into a small room, where a faint stream of moonlight filtered through a grate in the ceiling. The light, weak as it was, felt like a beacon in the suffocating darkness. My eyes, adjusted to the gloom, made out a figure in the corner of the room. A woman was sitting there, her face buried in her hands, her quiet sobs echoing off the walls. In that instant, I recognized her. It was Emily. The moment I saw Emily crouched in the corner of that dimly lit room, a surge of relief and joy washed over me. It was like a beacon of light piercing through the all-encompassing darkness of our nightmare. Ignoring my own pain, I rushed to her, my arms enveloping her in a tight embrace. The feeling of her alive and in my arms was indescribable, a mixture of overwhelming happiness and a profound sense of relief. As I held her close, I could feel her body shaking, her frame trembling with fear and discomfort. Her eyes, brimming with tears, met mine, and in them, I saw a reflection of the terror we were both feeling. She began to speak, her voice quivering. "I'm sick. My stomach. It hurts," she managed to say between sobs. Her confusion and fear were palpable as she bombarded me with questions. "Where are we? Who is that girl with you?" I tightened my hold on her, trying to offer some semblance of comfort and security. Panic was clawing at my own mind, but I fought to maintain a clear head. "Emily," I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. "We're in some kind of abandoned sewer. I'm not sure how we ended up here, but we can't stay. We need to find a way out." Her next words sent a shiver down my spine. "James, I'm afraid. I saw something in the dark, something big and scary." Her voice trailed off into sobs once more. The terror in her voice, the fear of an unseen danger, was a chilling reminder of the roar we had heard earlier. As we clung to each other, the silent girl approached us, tugging at my sleeve insistently. Her mute moans broke through the tension, a clear sign of her urgency. It was evident that she too sensed the danger we were in, and was imploring us to leave, to escape the perilous depths of this sewer. We navigated through the bleak corridors of the sewer, a chilling silence enveloping us. Emily, despite the ordeal, seemed to be in better condition than I had feared. The relief that she and our unborn child were not severely injured in the accident was immense, a small beacon of hope in our dire situation. As we walked, I noticed the small abrasions and bruises that marked her skin, the physical evidence of the trauma we had endured. She was strong, yet the stress and fear of our predicament were taking their toll. She complained of a headache and a nagging pain in her stomach, which I attributed to the anxiety and the unsettling environment. I held her hand tightly, offering whatever comfort and stability I could as we moved through the darkness. The little girl, who had become our silent companion, walked beside us. I explained to Emily how I had found her in these sewers, mute and alone. Emily looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and concern, her maternal instincts surfacing even in our grim surroundings. As we progressed, an uneasy silence fell upon us, broken only by the echoing sound of our footsteps and the distant drip of water. The damp, cold air of the sewer seemed to seep into our bones, a constant reminder of the harsh reality we were in. Suddenly, Emily stopped in her tracks, her body stiffening with pain. She let out a moan and fell to her knees, clutching her stomach tightly. My heart raced with fear as I realized what was happening. "James, something's wrong," she gasped between labored breaths. "The contractions are starting. I don't want to give birth here, James." Her words struck me with a force stronger than any physical blow. The fear in her eyes, the pain in her voice, it was almost too much to bear. The contractions, coming amidst our desperate escape, added a new, terrifying dimension to our predicament. The intensity of the moment was palpable as I stood helplessly beside Emily, her body racked with the pain of early labor. For a brief respite, the contractions ceased, allowing her to catch her breath, a small mercy in our dire situation. The silence in the corridor was a stark contrast to the turmoil we were experiencing. Suddenly, the little girl who had been our silent guide through this nightmare let out a loud, moaning sound. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, a clear indication that danger was imminent. Then, confirming my worst fears, the beastly roar we had dreaded filled the hallway once more. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I lifted Emily into my arms. With the girl leading the way, we hastened down the corridor, our footsteps echoing in the damp, dark space. The terror of the beast's pursuit drove us forward, a primal instinct to survive overwhelming everything else. Emily's moans of pain were a constant reminder of her labor. The contractions seemed to be getting stronger, her grip on her stomach tightening with each step. My own body was a battleground of pain and dizziness, a fever burning through me, adding to the surreal nightmare of our escape. The beast's presence was an ever-present threat behind us. The sound of its footsteps and low growl haunted our every move, a relentless pursuer in the dark labyrinth of the sewer. After what seemed like an eternity, we emerged into a room bathed in moonlight. Water dripped from the walls, and the ceiling opened up to reveal a dark, starry sky and a solitary moon. The sight was strangely beautiful, yet eerie in the context of our predicament. "James, look." Emily's voice, tinged with fear and wonder, broke the heavy silence. She pointed towards a corner of the room where a chilling sight awaited us. Piles of bones lay scattered in disarray, a macabre collection that sent shivers down my spine. Among the bones were skulls, not just of animals but of humans as well. It was a scene straight out of a horror story, a tangible reminder of the danger that stalked us. The realization that we had stumbled upon what seemed to be the beast's lair was horrifying. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sight of the bones, bleached and broken, told a story of terror and death. Sweat covered my back, despite the chill of the sewer. Fear gripped me, a fear not just for our safety, but for the life of our unborn child, whose arrival was imminent in the worst possible place. The girl started tugging on my sleeve again, bringing me back to reality from the fear and daze that had gripped me. She was pointing insistently towards another corner of the room, her small hand shaking slightly. Following her direction, I noticed a collection of items scattered about, seemingly abandoned. I moved towards them, pushing past the enveloping fear, and found an old, time-worn backpack among the debris. My hands, though trembling, carefully opened it to reveal its contents. Inside, I discovered a knife, a functioning lighter, and a bottle of lighter fluid. These items, though simple, felt like a lifeline in our desperate situation. As I rummaged through the backpack for anything else that might be useful, a familiar and terrifying roar echoed behind us. The beast was still in pursuit, reminding us that we were trespassing in its domain. The realization that we were its intended prey sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Acting quickly, I grabbed a sturdy stick from the ground, improvising a makeshift torch by wrapping my jacket around it. Dousing the jacket with lighter fluid, I prepared myself for the worst. The beast's presence was an ever-looming threat, and I needed to be ready to defend us at any moment. With Emily's hand clasped in mine, we hurried away from the grisly bone chamber. Each step was fraught with pain and difficulty. My leg, possibly broken, protested with sharp jolts of pain, and the increasing tightness in my chest made breathing a laborious task. The taste of blood in my mouth from the coughing fits was a grim reminder of my own deteriorating condition. Emily, amidst her own pain and the onset of labor, moved with a resilience that was both heart-wrenching and awe-inspiring. Her concern for me was evident, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and helplessness. In her state, she was already battling her own immense challenge, and the sight of my suffering only added to her distress. Our escape through the sewer was a slow, agonizing journey. The damp, echoing corridors seemed to stretch on endlessly, a maze with no discernible exit. The distant but ever-present growls of the beast served as a harrowing soundtrack to our desperate flight. Trudging through the endless, oppressive corridors of the sewer, a sense of surrealism began to cloud my mind. The cold, unyielding walls seemed to close in around us, as if they were part of a nightmarish landscape that defied reality. The agony racking my body, the relentless chill in the air, and the ever-present threat of the beast created an atmosphere of despair and disbelief. How did we end up in this forsaken place? This question echoed in my head, a relentless reminder of our dire situation. A pregnant wife, a mysterious mute girl, and a terrifying beast on our heels. It was a scenario so bizarre and horrifying that it seemed plucked from a nightmare. I reached my breaking point. My body, riddled with pain and exhaustion, gave way, and I collapsed onto the cold, damp ground. Emily, her own face etched with fear and fatigue, sat down beside me, wrapping her arms around me in a futile attempt to provide comfort. Her tears, quiet but persistent, were a heartbreaking testament to our desperation. As I sat there, my gaze drifted to the silent girl. Her presence had been a mystery from the start, but now, in the depths of our despair, her enigmatic nature felt even more unsettling. It was as if she had a connection with the beast, an unspoken understanding of its intentions. In a moment of desperation, I addressed the girl, my voice heavy with emotion. "Why? Tell me why this beast is chasing us. Why are we still alive? Why won't it leave us alone?" My questions hung in the air, a plea for answers, for some semblance of understanding. The girl looked at me, her eyes holding a depth that seemed beyond her years. Then, slowly, she picked up a stick and began to scribble something on the ground, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the ceiling. With Emily's support, I forced myself to stand and walked over to see what the girl had written. The words etched into the dirt sent a chill through my already weary body. In crude, childlike letters, the girl had written, "The beast is playing." The simplicity and horror of that message struck me with an overwhelming sense of despair. The realization that we were nothing more than pawns in a twisted game played by the beast was too much to bear. I covered my face with my hands, unable to contain the torrent of emotions that overwhelmed me. Tears streamed down my cheeks, a mixture of fear, frustration, and utter hopelessness. Emily sat beside me, her own sobs mingling with mine. Time seemed to stand still as we sat there, enveloped by darkness and despair. Emily's grip on my hand tightened suddenly, her body tensing as another wave of labor pains struck. The intensity of her moans pierced the silence of the sewer, a stark reminder of the perilous situation we found ourselves in. In the midst of this, the beast's roar echoed once again through the corridors, a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was closer now, its predatory growls a clear indication that it was closing in on us. The realization that the beast might be growing tired of its cruel game and was coming to claim us spurred me into action. I knew I had to muster every ounce of strength left in me. My wife and unborn child's lives depended on it. With a resolve born out of desperation, I helped Emily to her feet. Her labor pains were intensifying, but the imminent danger from the beast left us with no choice but to move. Emily leaned heavily on me, her hands gripping my shoulders for support. Each step was an agony for her, her face contorted in pain and fear. But the terror of the beast's approach was a powerful motivator, pushing us forward despite the unbearable circumstances. We moved slowly through the damp, winding passages of the sewer. Emily's labored breathing and soft cries of pain echoed off the walls, a constant reminder of the precariousness of our situation. The sewer seemed to stretch on endlessly, a labyrinth of despair and fear. The cold, damp air was suffocating, adding to the physical and emotional toll of our escape. Every corner we turned, every shadow we passed, seemed to hold the potential for danger. Despite the overwhelming odds, we continued our slow, painful journey. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, to ensure the safety of my family. The responsibility weighed heavily on me. The girl started mooing and tugging at me again. Exhaustion and fear had taken their toll on me, and the constant tugging of the girl at my sleeve was becoming a source of irritation. My shoulders ached, and each tug sent a sharp pain through my weary body. But then, she pointed to something in the darkness, her urgency unmistakable. Following her direction, my eyes fell upon a sight that reignited a flicker of hope in my heart. An intact iron ladder leading up to an open hatch. It was our chance to escape this nightmarish sewer, a potential path to salvation. With renewed energy, I hurried towards the ladder, assisting Emily as she struggled to climb, her labor pains making every movement a challenge. Just as we approached the ladder, a deep, guttural growl resonated through the corridor, chilling me to the core. Emerging from the shadows, the beast revealed itself in its full, terrifying form. Its fur was as black as the darkest night, and its fangs and claws glistened menacingly in the faint light. Its eyes, large and malevolent, fixed on us with a gleeful hunger. It was the embodiment of our fears, a nightmarish creature that seemed to relish in our terror. Frozen with fear, I stared at the beast, its grin a grotesque mockery of a smile. It was clear the beast viewed us as helpless prey, cornered and at its mercy. But desperation breeds courage, and I wasn't ready to give in to this monster. Recalling the makeshift torch I had prepared earlier, I swiftly pulled the lighter from my pocket. As the beast advanced, ready to pounce, I ignited the jacket wrapped around the stick. The flames burst to life, casting a fierce glow in the dim corridor. With a swift movement, I dodged the beast's paw and thrust the burning stick into its gaping mouth. The beast recoiled with a whimper, its howls of pain echoing off the sewer walls. Seizing the moment, I scrambled up the ladder, pushing Emily ahead of me, her labored breathing and soft cries urging me to move faster. The sounds of the beast's pained growls and whimpers filled the air behind us, a cacophony of agony and rage. But I didn't look back. Every ounce of my being was focused on getting Emily and myself out of this hellish place. Emerging from the sewer, the biting winter wind immediately assaulted us, a stark contrast to the stagnant air we had left behind. The distant hum of the town's activities and the flickering electric lights beyond the dense trees were a sight for sore eyes, a beacon of civilization and safety. Emily, clutching her stomach with a look of intense pain, suddenly collapsed. The contractions were intensifying, a clear sign that our baby was on the way. We couldn't afford to linger in the open, exposed and vulnerable. My mind raced, searching for a solution, but was interrupted by a sudden realization. The little girl who had been with us was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as I thought of her, possibly still trapped in the dark, dangerous sewer. Had she been left behind in our desperate escape? The thought was agonizing, but my body was at its limit. Each breath was a struggle, and my injuries were taking their toll. I had barely enough strength to escape the beast and climb up to safety. Going back seemed like an impossible feat. As I hesitated, torn between the need to rescue the girl and the immediate crisis at hand, Emily grabbed my arm. Her eyes, filled with pain and fear, pleaded with me. "James, help me. I can't take it anymore," she whispered, her voice strained with agony. In that moment, my priorities crystallized. Emily and our unborn child needed me now, more than ever. With a heavy heart and a sense of deep regret for the girl we were leaving behind, I helped Emily to her feet and started walking towards the town lights. each step a battle against my own physical limitations. We eventually reached the outskirts of the town, and the first house we came upon seemed like a haven. I pounded on the door with the last bit of my energy, desperation clear in each knock. The door swung open, revealing the shocked faces of the homeowners. Their expressions turned from confusion to concern as they took in our disheveled, injured appearances and Emily's obvious distress. We must have been a sight to behold. A man battered and bruised, supporting a pregnant woman in the throes of labor, appearing out of the night like apparitions. But in that moment, all that mattered was the safety and the urgent need for help that we had finally found. We were taken to the hospital. As I lay in the hospital bed, my body numbed by painkillers and a myriad of stitches holding my wounds together, my mind was a whirlpool of confusion and disbelief. The sterile white of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the dark, damp sewer where I had spent what felt like an eternity. The reality that Emily was giving birth just one floor below added to the surreal nature of the moment. The police arrived that night, their questions probing and persistent. I recounted the harrowing events as best I could, emphasizing the urgency to rescue the little girl we had left behind in the sewer. My description of the beast, a werewolf-like creature, was met with exchanged glances of skepticism among the officers. When they showed me a series of photographs, my heart skipped a beat. Among them was the image of a family, and there she was, the girl with pigtails, wearing a pink jacket and jeans, smiling innocently beside her mother. I pointed her out immediately, insisting that she was the same girl trapped in the sewer. But instead of springing into action, the policemen exchanged another strange look. What they revealed next sent chills down my spine. The family in the photograph, including the little girl, had disappeared 6 years ago. Their whereabouts remained a mystery, an unsolved case that had haunted the town. The policeman further explained that there were no sewers under the city as I had described. In fact, others had emerged from the woods before me, spinning similar tales of abandoned sewers and werewolves. Their words spun around me, a vortex of incomprehensibility. Was it all a shared delusion? A group fantasy? How could my experiences, so vivid and terrifying, align with the stories of others? My mind struggled to piece together the reality, but my weakened state blurred the lines between what was real and what was imagined. In the midst of my confusion and shock, a doctor entered the room. His news momentarily cut through the fog in my mind. I was a father now. Emily had given birth to a baby girl. The juxtaposition of the horror I had experienced and the miracle of new life left me reeling.
Story 2.
As I, Jimmy, stepped onto the cavernous hold of the cargo plane, a sense of the familiar mixed with the unknown enveloped me. It was another mission transporting rare animals from East Asia, a task I had grown accustomed to. Yet each flight bore its own unique story. The animals, caged yet regal in their confinement, filled the space with a sense of life that belied their captivity. I moved among them with a practiced ease, ensuring their comfort, my routine punctuated by the occasional snarl or chirp. The crew was a patchwork of experience and novelty. The pilots, Captain Thompson and First Officer Lee, were like two pieces of a puzzle not yet fitting perfectly, skilled but still learning each other's rhythms. We had a flight service engineer, Mike, whose hands spoke of years of toil on machines, and a flight attendant, Sarah, whose smile was a welcome relief amidst the metallic coldness of the plane. Then there were my fellow escorts, each a guardian in their own right. There was the stoic Mark, a veteran in animal transportation, his gaze always steady. The jovial Carlos, whose laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence of our cargo. And the newcomer, Aida, a veterinarian. Aida, hailing from East Asia, had eyes that seemed to understand the unspoken language of the animals. Her presence was both a mystery and a comfort. As the engines hummed to life, I found myself performing my duties almost mechanically, feeding the animals, checking their cages, ensuring their safety. These actions had become a part of me, as natural as breathing. But there was more to this journey than the physical tasks. I watched Ida, her hands gentle yet firm, her voice soothing yet authoritative as she tended to the animals. There was a grace in her movements, a story in her silence. Our conversations were sparse, filled more with the exchange of glances and nods than words. Yet, in those moments, a connection was forming. a bond over our shared responsibility. She was an enigma, a reminder of the diverse tapestry of life and experiences that converged in this flying hangar. We ate in silence, the hum of the engines a constant companion. Evenings were spent in solitude, each lost in their thoughts, the vastness of the skies outside a mirror to our introspection. I often found myself opening crates, checking supplies, my hands moving with a precision born of practice. These moments of mundane activity were a comfort, a reminder that life, even in the extraordinary circumstances of a cargo plane transporting rare animals, was grounded in the simple acts of living. As the journey continued, I watched the landscape change beneath us, a tapestry of earth and water, of civilization and wilderness. The hold of the large cargo plane was a menagerie in flight, each cage a window to a different corner of the wild. The bear, its presence impossible to ignore, let out intermittent roars that vibrated through the air. The family of foxes, huddled together, watched us with keen, calculating eyes. The mountain eagle, perched stoically, seemed to hold its own against the rumble of the engines. The wolves and tigers, each in their enclosures, exuded a raw, untamed power. Amidst this wild assembly, Aida, the new veterinarian from East Asia, moved with a grace that seemed to calm even the most restless of our charges. Her presence, new to the team, brought a fresh perspective and a gentle strength. Our interactions, initially professional and focused on the well-being of the animals, gradually took on a lighter tone. Her smile, her jokes, they brought a human touch to the stark environment of the cargo hold. I found myself drawn to her, curious about her story, and eager to bridge the gap between professional camaraderie and personal connection. Yet, amidst the routine of animal care and the developing dynamics of our crew, there was an element of mystery that persisted. A completely sealed crate cage. This container, unlike the others, offered no glimpse of its occupant. Mr. Mark, the senior escort, was the only one who tended to this hidden charge. His actions were methodical and private, feeding and caring for the unseen animal within. The rest of us, including Carlos, were left to our imaginations about what creature required such secrecy. The flight, charted over several days with a scheduled refueling stop, was progressing smoothly until an unforeseen incident jolted us from our routine. The cage of the foxes, somehow, had been left unsecured, and in a moment of collective lapse, the cunning animals had escaped into the hold. The calm of our journey was broken as the foxes, quick and elusive, turned the cargo space into a labyrinth of hide-and-seek. Mr. Mark, taking immediate command, directed our efforts to recapture them. Aida, surprisingly adept in the crisis, joined Carlos and me in the effort. Her calm demeanor and quick thinking were invaluable in the chaos. The task was daunting, requiring a delicate balance of urgency and care to avoid harming the foxes or causing further disruption. Working alongside Ada, I felt a bond forming, forged in the heat of the moment. Her quick smiles amidst the tension, her focused eyes, they spoke of a depth of character that went beyond her role as a veterinarian. As I delved deeper into the cargo hold, the hunt for the escaped foxes morphed from a frantic scramble into a methodical search. The dim lighting cast long shadows among the crates, turning familiar shapes into looming specters. The hum of the aircraft's engines, a constant backdrop to our lives in the air, seemed to grow more ominous with each passing moment. Ida was close by, her presence a silent comfort amidst the growing unease. It was then that Mark, our senior specialist, stumbled upon a discovery so gruesome, it chilled the very air we breathed. Hidden among the crates, almost merging with the shadows, was a body, a man, or what remained of him. His head was missing, and his chest. It looked as if his heart had been violently ripped out. A cold dread crept over me, the kind that clutches at your soul and refuses to let go. The man was a stranger, not listed among those who boarded the plane. Questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. How had he come to be on our flight? Who was he? And most horrifyingly, who or what could have done this to him? Panic spread like wildfire among the crew and escorts. The decision was made swiftly. We needed to land at the nearest airport. to alert the authorities, to escape this creeping terror. As discussions erupted among the senior specialists and the airplane crew, I returned to my duties, a feeble attempt to cling to normalcy. But the ordinary had abandoned us. Approaching the row of cages to feed the animals, my heart skipped a beat. The completely locked crate cage, the one that had held an unknown, possibly dangerous animal, was open, empty. A surge of fear gripped me, an icy hand squeezing my chest. I rushed to Mark, my words tumbling out in a panicked blur. His reaction was one of pure terror. The color drained from his face, his eyes wide with a fear that sent shivers down my spine. He demanded, with a voice edged with desperation, that the plane be landed immediately, anywhere suitable. The atmosphere in the cargo hold had shifted irrevocably. The unknown creature that had escaped from the crate was out there, somewhere in the plane, a silent threat lurking in the shadows. Mark's actions were swift and decisive, a stark contrast to the thick fog of uncertainty that had settled over us. In a matter of moments, he had gathered the attendants, the flight engineer, myself, and even Sarah, the flight attendant. His movements were brisk, his face etched with a seriousness that brooked no argument. He began distributing shotguns, the heavy metal of the firearms cold and alien in my hands. "Monster," he said simply when I pressed him for answers. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications I couldn't begin to comprehend. "If you see it, you won't need me to tell you what it is. Shoot on sight." His instructions were clear, yet they left a chasm of unanswered questions. What kind of monster had been lurking in that sealed crate? Why hadn't we been informed? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but there was no time for hesitation. Mark's urgency was infectious. We were a team, albeit an unprepared and frightened one, thrown together by circumstances beyond our comprehension. The gravity of our situation was palpable, a tangible force that bound us together as the plane descended towards an unscheduled landing. Then came the realization that Aida was missing. She hadn't responded to her radio, and no one had seen her for over an hour. Panic, already a constant companion, spiked. Aida, with her gentle strength and quiet confidence, had become more than just a colleague. She was a friend, someone I had come to admire. I volunteered to search for her, driven by a mix of concern and an unspoken bond that had formed between us. Mark, though reluctant, had no choice but to agree. We split into groups, a decision that fractured our fragile unity, sending us into the dimly lit corridors of the plane, armed and fearful. The search for Ada was a journey through a landscape transformed. The familiar confines of the cargo plane had become a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty. Each creak of the aircraft's structure was a potential harbinger of danger. The soft hum of the engines, once a comforting sign of normalcy, now seemed like a distant, unattainable peace. Our group moved cautiously, the weight of the shotguns a constant reminder of the potential threat that lurked among us. The tension was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak that stifled conversation and heightened our senses. Every shadow, every unexpected noise sent jolts of adrenaline coursing through me. As we progressed, the reality of our situation weighed heavily on my mind. The sealed crate, the gruesome discovery of the headless, heartless body, the missing Ida, each element added a layer of horror to our predicament. I called out for Ida, my voice echoing in the empty spaces of the aircraft. There was no response, just the hollow sound of my own voice bouncing back at me, a mocking reminder of our isolation. The search continued, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. Our search through the plane, Mark and I, was a cautious, tense journey. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. The shotgun felt heavy in my hands, a burden of responsibility I had never imagined bearing. The silence around us was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the aircraft's engines and the occasional creak of its frame. It was a sound that, under different circumstances, would have been a mere background noise, but now each creak seemed ominous, a potential signal of hidden dangers. The whisper that reached our ears was like a lifeline in the murky waters of fear and uncertainty. Exchanging a look with Mark, we moved towards the sound, each step heavy with the weight of what we might find. The narrow corridor leading into the dark depths of the cargo bay seemed to stretch into infinity, a path leading into the unknown. There, in a shadowed corner, we found Aida. Her presence was both a relief and a new knot of worry. She sat, clutching her medical case, her face etched with worry and fear. Relief flashed across her face as she saw us, a momentary break in the storm of emotions that surrounded us. Mark's voice, tense with concern, broke the silence. "What's going on here?" His eyes, dark and intense, sought answers in Aida's face. Her response, a tale of strange noises and a glimpse of something monstrous, added layers to the mystery and terror that enveloped us. She spoke of a creature covered in fur, a fleeting shadow that disappeared into the darkness, prompting her to hide. The decision to return to the cabin was made swiftly, a strategic retreat in the face of an unknown and dangerous adversary. But our plans were shattered as suddenly as they were made. The creature, a monstrous embodiment of our darkest fears, emerged from the darkness. Its fur was black as the night, its eyes glinted ominously, and its claws, they were the stuff of nightmares. Mark's command to shoot was a reflex, an instinctive response to the immediate threat, but our efforts were in vain. The creature moved with a terrifying agility, dodging our desperate shots. In a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it leaped, its deadly claws finding their mark. Mark's screams tore through the air, a sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The horror of the moment was paralyzing, but Ada's presence, her hand gripping mine, pulled me back to reality. We retreated, the sounds of the creature and Mark's agony fading into the background, swallowed by the relentless noise of the engines. As we made our way to the safety of the other side of the plane, the animal cages cast an eerie light, their inhabitants silent witnesses to the unfolding nightmare. As Ida and I stumbled into the relative safety where the other crew members were gathered, the weight of the horrors we had witnessed hung heavily upon us. "We lost Mark," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My voice, a shaky whisper, told of the monster's attack, a tale so nightmarish it seemed unreal even as I recounted it. The faces around me were etched with fear, a stark reminder that we were trapped in the sky, far from any haven. The sense of vulnerability was palpable, a tangible presence that clung to us like a shroud. The engineer, a man of practicality and logic, voiced what we were all thinking. We must find a safe place. The cockpit, with its reinforced door and limited access, seemed our best hope. We moved as a unit, a band of survivors bound by a shared terror. Each step was cautious, each shadow a potential hiding place for the beast that stalked us. Our progress was a journey through a landscape transformed by fear. The familiar contours of the airplane were now alien and menacing. Then, without warning, the creature struck again. It emerged from the shadows like a specter, its form cloaked in darkness. Its claws, glistening in the dim light, were instruments of death. The flight attendant's scream, a piercing sound of pure terror, shattered the tense silence. We fought back, our rifles a feeble defense against the swift brutality of the monster. It moved with a terrifying agility, its strength overwhelming. The struggle was brief and fierce, a chaotic dance of survival and horror. And then, silence. The aftermath was a scene from a nightmare. The flight attendant, her body covered in blood, lay still and lifeless. Carlos was also lying on the floor unmoving, his struggle over. The monster had vanished, leaving behind a trail of blood and an oppressive silence that weighed heavily upon us. I grabbed Ida's arm, urgency lending strength to my voice. "We need to get out of here before that monster comes back," a desperate plan forming in my mind. We moved into the darkness of the plane, a shadowy realm that offered both concealment and danger. Our escape was a frantic rush through the corridors, a flight from the horror that lurked behind us. Each step was a leap of faith, a hope against hope that we would find a way out of this nightmare. The darkness around us was a cloak, hiding us from the creature, but also obscuring our path to safety. The silence that enveloped us was a stark contrast to the chaos that had reigned moments before. It was a silence that spoke of death, of lives brutally ended. Our hearts pounded in our chests, a frenzied rhythm that matched our hurried steps. Aida and I moved with a haste born of fear, our breaths ragged and uneven, competing with the pounding of our hearts. The echoes of the horrific battle we had fled seemed to reverberate within us, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Finding a momentary shelter, I paused, trying to gather my thoughts amidst the chaos. It dawned on me how isolated we were. The pilot sequestered in the cockpit, possibly an engineer somewhere in the bowels of the plane, and us. My radio, lost in the frantic escape, had cut off our only means of communication. We were alone, with a treacherous expanse between us and safety. "We can't stay here," I whispered to Ada, my voice barely audible. "We need to get to the cockpit. But something, that thing, it's out there." The words hung heavily in the air, a tangible expression of the peril that loomed over us. Aida's nod was resolute, her face a blend of fear and determination. The realization of our situation was clear in her eyes. We were pawns in a deadly game, a struggle for survival against an unfathomable foe. A plan began to form in my mind, born of desperation and a flicker of hope. Perhaps the engineer, if he was still alive, could help us. His knowledge of the plane might be our key to escaping this nightmare. We decided to retrace our steps, to venture back through the mangled corridor where the creature had attacked. With each step into the darkness, my anxiety mounted. The shadows seemed alive, moving and shifting in the corner of my vision. Every creak and groan of the aircraft was a potential harbinger of doom. Then, without warning, it appeared. The monster, a creature of nightmares, rushed out of the darkness. Ida and I pressed ourselves into the shadows, our breaths held, our bodies rigid with fear. The monster paused, its head tilting as it sniffed the air. It turned towards us, its eyes seeming to pierce the darkness, and for a moment I thought we were discovered. But then, a noise elsewhere in the cargo hold distracted it. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, and with a grace that belied its size, it moved off towards the source of the disturbance. We waited, our hearts pounding in our ears, until the sound of its movement faded. Releasing the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, I looked at Ada. "Now," I whispered, urgency lending speed to our movements. We made our way towards the cockpit, our steps cautious but swift. The journey was a maze of fear and shadows, each turn a potential encounter with death. The dim emergency lights cast eerie patterns on the walls, transforming the familiar into the surreal. Reaching the cockpit door, we paused. It was a moment of respite, a brief interlude in the nightmare that had enveloped us. But it was also a moment of decision, a threshold between the relative safety we had found and the unknown dangers that lay ahead. Entering, we were met with a scene that upended the last vestiges of normalcy. One pilot sat rigidly at the helm, his back to us, while the other lay crumpled on the floor, a pool of blood painting a gruesome picture. My eyes fixed on the lifeless form of the pilot, my mind struggling to piece together the fragments of this horrifying puzzle. I turned to the surviving pilot, questions tumbling from my lips, but the words died in my throat. A noise behind us, the sound of impending doom, drew our attention. The creature, the monster from the depths of nightmare, stood there, its hands clutching the mangled remains of the engineer. Aida's reaction was the cruelest twist of the knife. Instead of fear, she smiled, welcoming the beast. She approached it, her movements gentle, a grotesque parody of tenderness. The monster responded in kind, its nuzzling a surreal display of affection. My world spun, reality splintering into shards of disbelief and horror. The pilot's voice, cold and detached, floated to my ears. "So what are we going to do with you, Jimmy?" The monster growled, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my very soul, and started advancing towards me. I fell to my knees, the shock anchoring me to the spot. The realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. Aida, the pilot, the monster, they were together in this. I was trapped, a lone figure against a conspiracy of darkness. Then, in a moment that defied all logic, Aida stepped between the monster and me. Her voice, calm and decisive, addressed the beast. "I liked him, Father. Let's leave him alone. No one will believe him anyway." She turned to the pilot, her suggestion chilling. "I think he can be locked in a cage." My mind reeled, grappling with the unfolding betrayal. Ida's smile, once a source of comfort, now twisted into a sinister curve. The pilot moved with a purpose, the shotgun in his hand, an instrument of finality. A hard blow to my head sent stars exploding across my vision. The last image seared into my consciousness was Aida's smiling face, a portrait of betrayal, and the shotgun descending towards me. Waking up, my first sensation was the throbbing pain in my head, a pulsating drumbeat that anchored me back to a grim reality. My eyes fluttered open, the blurred world slowly coming into focus. I was in a cage, my body lying on a hard, unforgiving surface. The cargo hold of the airplane, once familiar, now seemed like a foreign landscape. Men in military uniforms were moving around, their voices a chorus of an unfamiliar language. They approached my cage, their words unintelligible, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. I tried to rise, but my body rebelled, weakness and pain conspiring to keep me grounded. The men's voices grew louder, their questions a volley I couldn't answer. My attempts to explain, to convey the horrors of what had transpired, were lost in the chasm of language. Scattered around me in the cage were syringes and packets of sleeping pills, evidence of the chemical cocktail that had led to my incapacitated state. The realization brought a wave of nausea, a physical manifestation of the betrayal and horror that had led me here. Eventually, I was lifted onto a stretcher, a transition from the cage that was both a physical and symbolic release. Yet, as I was carried out of the plane, the relief was tempered by the sight that greeted me. The plane had landed in a wide clearing, a secluded nook amidst dense trees and towering mountains. The isolation of the location was palpable, a stark reminder of our vulnerability in the face of the unknown. As I was carried away, glimpses of the plane's interior revealed the grim aftermath of our ordeal. The bodies of the crew, lifeless and still, were being removed. The caged animals, silent witnesses to the nightmare, were a jarring juxtaposition to the human tragedy. The news that 2 crew members were missing was a final twist, a lingering question mark at the end of a tale of horror and mystery. Their fate, unknown and perhaps unknowable, added a haunting layer to the events that had unfolded. As the stretcher moved further away from the plane, the forest around us seemed to close in, a natural barrier that separated us from the rest of the world. I was left to wonder, to try to make sense of the senseless, as the shadows of the trees lengthened and the mountains stood as silent sentinels to the horrors that had occurred.
Story 3.
As the relentless sun scorched the vast, seemingly boundless Syrian desert, I, Captain John Hawkins, stood steadfastly by the colossal HMTT truck. My gaze was fixed on the meticulous loading of vital communication equipment. The air was filled with the gruff shouts of the loaders, a cacophony that underscored the significance of our task. Each crate, especially the large one that was the centerpiece of our cargo, was handled with a reverence that bordered on the religious. This crate, sealed tightly and peppered with mysterious holes, piqued my curiosity, but protocol in the stern, looks from the overseeing government officials, kept my questions at bay. Among these officials, several individuals in nondescript civilian attire stood out. They kept their eyes hawk-like on the cargo, particularly the enigmatic large crate, suggesting its contents were of extraordinary value. Our mission was deceptively simple, yet of paramount importance. Transport cargo from the ancient, storied city of Palmyra to Deir ez-Zor, a journey that, under normal circumstances, would take about 6 hours along the M20 highway. However, these were not normal circumstances. The route cut straight through the heart of the Syrian desert, a land infamous for its unforgiving heat, sudden and blinding sandstorms, and the ever-present threat of ambushes by local bandits. It was a land that tested the mettle of even the most seasoned travelers. Thus, our squad of 10, bolstered by the presence of 5 government officials, was tasked with ensuring the safe passage of this mysterious cargo. Our preparations had been thorough. Each member of the team was a seasoned veteran, handpicked for their expertise and experience in such high-risk operations. The air was thick with tension, a silent acknowledgement of the dangers that lay ahead. The final piece of equipment was secured with a resounding click, signaling the end of our preparations and the beginning of our perilous journey. I made my way to my designated vehicle, the heart of our convoy. The truck was an imposing beast, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. Inside, I was joined by Lieutenant Smith, a man of few words but unshakable composure, and Mr. Jefferson, a tall, enigmatic figure from the government whose age seemed hard to place. He carried himself with an air of authority that demanded respect. Our convoy was a formidable sight. Leading and trailing were two heavily armored MRAPs, their mounted machine guns casting ominous shadows. Our truck, carrying the precious cargo, was sandwiched securely in the middle. Flanking us were a couple of sleek SUVs, their tinted windows hiding the government officials who were as much a mystery as the cargo we were transporting. The journey began with the slow, lumbering movement of our convoy out of the private courtyard, where the loading had taken place. We passed an old Arab stone house, its architecture a testament to the region's rich history. Its high, narrow windows overlooked an inner courtyard where a once vibrant fountain now lay silent, a mute witness to the passage of time and the stories it carried. The local children, their faces a mixture of curiosity and awe, clustered along the road, their excited chatter and pointing fingers a brief, heartening distraction from the weight of our mission. As we left the confines of civilization, the terrain shifted. The road became a mere dirt track, a precursor to the vast, open desert that lay ahead. The landscape around us was a tapestry of extremes, endless dunes that rose and fell like the waves of a petrified ocean, their golden hues ever changing with the sun's position. Here and there, hardy shrubs clung to life, their existence a defiant stand against the harsh, arid climate. The air was thick and hot, a tangible presence that seemed to press against us with an almost physical weight. The sky was a relentless expanse of blue, unmarred by clouds, its vastness a reminder of our insignificance in the face of nature's grandeur. The silence of the desert was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the loading area. It was a silence that spoke volumes, filled with the whispers of ancient sands and the secrets they held. In this desolate expanse, the sun was a merciless overseer, its rays beating down upon us with an intensity that seemed to penetrate to the very core. The heat was more than just a physical sensation. It was an ever-present force, an adversary we had to contend with every moment. The shimmering heat haze on the horizon danced and distorted the landscape, creating mirages that toyed with our senses. Our convoy trudged along, a metallic beast crawling through the ancient sands. Inside the truck, the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio were the only sounds that pierced the overwhelming silence. The atmosphere was one of solemn anticipation, each of us lost in our own thoughts, mentally preparing for the journey ahead. I glanced at Mr. Jefferson, who sat stoically, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His demeanor was an enigma, calm yet unreadable, adding another layer of mystery to our mission. Lieutenant Smith, ever the professional, kept his focus on the road, his hands steady on the wheel despite the rough terrain. As we approached the M20 highway, the landscape began to change subtly. The endless dunes gave way to flatter, more navigable terrain, though the oppressive heat and the blinding brightness of the sun remained constant companions. The highway itself, a lifeline cutting through the desert, stretched out before us, a ribbon of tarmac that represented both our path forward and the challenges that lay ahead. I broke the silence, my voice sounding strangely loud in the confines of the truck. "Mr. Jefferson, this cargo we're transporting, can you tell us anything about it?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. He turned his gaze to me, his eyes revealing nothing. "It's just equipment, Captain. Nothing for you to worry about," he replied, his voice even and unemotional. I nodded, though his response did little to quell my curiosity. Beside me, Lieutenant Smith opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He turned his attention back to the road, a silent acknowledgement that some questions were better left unasked. As we merged onto the highway, our speed increased, the convoy settling into a steady rhythm. The landscape blurred past us, a monotonous blend of sand and sky. As the relentless sun bore down upon us, our convoy, a line of dust-covered vehicles, wound its way through the Syrian desert. The silence inside the truck was as dense as the heat outside. Only the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio broke the monotonous drone. I sat deep in thought, my gaze occasionally drifting to the barren, sun-bleached landscape that stretched endlessly on either side of the highway. A fleeting glimpse of a desert fox, a rare sight in these arid lands, momentarily captured our attention as it darted across the road. Its russet fur was a stark contrast against the pale sands, a fleeting moment of life in an otherwise lifeless expanse. It was in this moment that Mr. Jefferson chose to speak. "Captain, how long have you served in Syria?" he asked, his voice smooth yet carrying an undercurrent of curiosity. "Nearly a year, sir," I replied, maintaining a professional demeanor. He nodded thoughtfully before delving into a topic seemingly unrelated to our current task. "You must have had extensive contact with the locals. Have you ever heard about the wild asses that once roamed here?" he inquired. His question caught me off guard. "No, sir, I haven't. My focus has been elsewhere," I responded, slightly puzzled by the sudden shift in conversation. Clearly, the Syrian wild ass, Equus hemionus hemippus, a subspecies of the wild ass, once inhabited the Middle East. Smaller and more resilient than its counterparts, adapted to the arid desert conditions, it struggled to survive. Yet despite its efforts, it became extinct, succumbed to hunting and habitat loss. Humans are cold and merciless, and in the war against them, one must either hide from them or adapt to become useful, to not interfere. This is the path to survival. The Arabs have a legend. In the endless deserts of the Middle East, caravans whispered legends of a ghoul named Zahira. She was a night creature, a twisted echo of her former human self. Zahira lived in the ruins of ancient cities, luring unsuspecting travelers with the guise of a young, seductive woman. Those who succumbed to her charms ended up in her lair, never to return. It is said Zahira was once a princess who fell victim to a curse for her pride and cruelty. Transformed into a ghoul, she roamed battlefields and graveyards, feeding on the dead. She could transform into various forms, often appearing as a hyena or reverting to human form to deceive her prey. The only way to defeat Zahira was with a single, decisive weapon strike. A second strike would revive her. I listened, intrigued yet wary. "An interesting story," I finally said, trying to gauge his intention behind sharing such a tale. Mr. Jefferson's response was a thin smile. "Imagine if the wild asses had adapted like Zahira. Would they have met the same fate? Adaptation, Captain, is the key to survival. And perhaps it's not just the domain of rats and cockroaches," he mused, his smile widening just a fraction. The conversation dwindled, leaving me to ponder his words. I reflexively checked my pistol, a habit ingrained from years of service. His talk of mythical creatures and the parallels he drew with our mission left me unsettled. I felt a sudden dryness in my throat and reached for my water flask, unscrewing the cap and taking a long sip. But then, a sound from behind, a distinct thud, made me choke on the water, coughing as I hastily turned around. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but all I saw was the dusty road and the convoy trailing us. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. Lieutenant Smith, our driver, gave a brief nod, his expression tense. Mr. Jefferson, however, remained calm, almost unnervingly so. After a brief silence, he simply said, "Pay it no mind." His nonchalance did little to ease my growing sense of unease. What were we carrying in this convoy that warranted such secrecy and protection? Before I could probe further, the unexpected happened. The vehicle ahead came to a sudden, grinding halt, sending a jolt through our truck as we braked hard. Without hesitation, I grabbed my rifle and exited the truck. My eyes scanned the surroundings, the stark, unyielding desert offering no clues. The heat was a palpable force, waves of it distorting the air and blending the horizon into a mirage. The road, once a symbol of connection and progress, now resembled a war-torn landscape, riddled with deep craters and littered with debris. Massive chunks of asphalt lay scattered like the remnants of some forgotten battle, a stark reminder of the conflict that had ravaged this land. My eyes surveyed the destruction, a knot of apprehension tightening in my gut. Lieutenant Harris, leading the convoy in the first vehicle, approached me with a grave expression that mirrored my concern. "Captain, this route is impassable," he stated, pointing to the ravaged highway. "Our best option is to detour through the desert and loop back to the road further on." His voice carried the weight of experience, one honed in the crucible of countless missions. The desert, though seemingly empty, was fraught with hidden dangers. Mines could be buried beneath the innocent-looking sands, and the occasional scrubby bushes provided ideal cover for insurgents. I scanned the horizon, the vast expanse of sand stretching out in every direction, feeling the weight of the decision upon me. It was then that Mr. Jefferson, the enigmatic government official who had been a constant presence of mystery, joined our discussion. His gaze lingered on the devastated road before us. "We need to move quickly, Captain," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "We don't have the luxury of time. Take the detour." His words brooked no argument, and I could sense an underlying importance in his tone that went beyond our immediate predicament. Reluctantly, I issued the order. A scout vehicle moved ahead, cautiously navigating the treacherous off-road terrain while we maintained a safe distance. The journey was jarring. The vehicle shook violently as it traversed the uneven desert. Amidst the tumultuous ride, the mysterious thumping from the cargo area returned, more insistent than before. I cast a questioning glance at Mr. Jefferson, frustration edging my voice. "What in God's name are we carrying?" His response was curt, delivered with a commanding authority that brooked no further inquiry. "Ignore it, Captain. That's an order." His words echoed in my mind as we continued our journey. The soldiers around me shared looks of unease, each man battling his own thoughts and fears. Eventually, we navigated the rough terrain and rejoined the highway. The soldiers' tension was palpable, eyes constantly roving, hands gripping their weapons a little tighter. The gunner swiveled ceaselessly, vigilant against any potential threat. Despite the ever-present danger, we encountered no further obstacles and accelerated along the highway. The road ahead stretched into the distance, flanked by small cliffs and mountains that heralded a more dangerous terrain. The looming canyons were notorious for their treacherous turns and hidden crevices, perfect for ambushes. As we entered a narrow canyon, the towering rock walls closed in around us, their imposing presence casting long, dark shadows across our path. The canyon was a stark, rugged beauty, its walls a tapestry of reds, oranges, and browns, carved by the relentless forces of nature over millennia. The narrow path wound its way through the towering cliffs, the silence of the desert amplified by the enclosing rocks. Here, in this ancient corridor carved by wind and time, we were acutely aware of our vulnerability. Small shrubs and hardy plants clung to life in the crevices, their stubborn existence a testament to the harshness of this environment. We proceeded with heightened caution, the convoy tightly knit as we navigated the serpentine path. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of danger. The soldiers were tense, their training and instincts on high alert. The atmosphere was charged, each of us braced for the unseen and the unexpected. It was about 5 minutes into the canyon when my gaze fell upon something unsettling. A kufiya, its red and white fabric barely visible against the rocky backdrop. A surge of adrenaline shot through me as I grasped the full implication of what I was seeing. Danger was imminent. I reached for the radio to alert the others, but my actions were too slow. From behind a large boulder, a figure appeared, brandishing a rocket launcher, the unmistakable silhouette of a Soviet-made Igla anti-tank system. Time seemed to slow as I watched him launch the missile, its trail zigzagging through the air towards us. I yelled a warning, but it was lost in the cacophony of the ensuing explosion. The world erupted in chaos. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the convoy, and our vehicle, caught in the maelstrom, was violently tossed. I could hear the screeching of metal, the shattering of glass, and the shouts of my men, all melding into a symphony of destruction. The impact was like a hammer blow, throwing me against the interior of the truck. My head spun, and my vision blurred, the line between consciousness and darkness wavering precariously. As consciousness slowly seeped back into my mind, I found myself being dragged across the rugged terrain of the Syrian desert. The ground beneath me was a patchwork of coarse sand and sharp rocks, scraping against my skin with every jolt. My ears rang with the cacophony of gunfire and desperate shouts, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had preceded the ambush. When my vision finally cleared, I saw my squad members in defensive positions, their faces etched with determination and fear. They were firing towards distant shadows, figures obscured by the haze of the desert heat. We were on a slight incline, a vantage point about a mile away from the smoldering remains of our convoy. The scene was one of utter devastation. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and rubber. Scattered around the wreckage were our assailants, easily distinguishable in their eclectic mix of traditional Arabic clothing and military gear. It was apparent that we had been overwhelmed by their numbers, forcing us to retreat to this precarious position. They were systematically firing in our direction while simultaneously scavenging through the remnants of our cargo. Amongst the chaos, I noticed several of them attempting to force open the largest crate, the primary focus of our mission. With effort, I managed to get to my feet and grab my rifle, joining my squad in the firefight. I took aim at the figures surrounding the crate, my heart pounding as I squeezed the trigger. I managed to hit one, watching as his comrades hastily dragged him to cover, but they did not cease their efforts to open the crate. Mr. Jefferson, who until now had been an enigmatic presence, was actively firing beside me. Amidst the chaos, he yelled out, emphasizing the importance of preventing the crate from being opened. We concentrated our firepower, but our efforts were in vain. The assailants had managed to pry the crate half open, and what followed seemed like a nightmare come to life. The crate's door suddenly burst outward from the inside, hitting one of the attackers with such force that he was thrown several feet into the air. From within, a creature emerged. It was massive, resembling a grotesquely mutated dog, its movements a blur of deadly precision. It tore through the attackers with a ferocious rage that was chilling to witness. The beast's killing spree was brutal and swift. It lunged at one man, biting off his limb in a spray of blood. Another assailant was disemboweled within seconds, his insides spilling onto the desert sand. The air was filled with the sickening sounds of flesh being torn and bones being crushed. As the creature wreaked havoc, the attackers' focus shifted from us to the new threat. Their screams of terror mingled with the sound of gunfire as they desperately tried to fend off the beast. The scene before us was one of pure carnage, the ground quickly turning into a gruesome tableau soaked in blood. In the midst of this horror, panic set in among the bandits, and they began to flee. The creature pursued them relentlessly, its fury unrelenting. Mr. Jefferson's voice cut through our shock, urging us to move. I nodded, snapping out of my dazed state, and quickly assessed our situation. A roll call revealed the heart-wrenching cost of the ambush. Corporal Smith, always the one to lighten the mood, and Senior Lieutenant Evertley, the embodiment of stoicism, were both gone. Their absence created a void that was felt deeply by every member of our squad. Additionally, one of the government officials had been killed. Our numbers were now reduced to 8, including 2 wounded and 4 remaining government agents. I radioed for backup, receiving confirmation that help would arrive in 6 hours. Our immediate priority was to distance ourselves from the chaos and the unknown horror we had unleashed. The only remaining vehicle, an MRAP, had been rendered inoperable during our retreat. We salvaged what we could: stretchers for the wounded, essential equipment, ammunition, and, most importantly, water. In the unforgiving desert, water was as valuable as life itself. The realization that we needed to evacuate immediately was unanimous. The creature, a living embodiment of terror, posed a threat we were ill-equipped to handle. It was a force of nature, unpredictable and deadly. As we prepared to leave, the gravity of our situation weighed heavily on us. The burning vehicles behind us were a grim reminder of the day's events, a testament to the chaos we had narrowly escaped. Yet, there was no time for mourning or reflection. Survival was our only objective. I activated the GPS beacon to ensure that rescuers could locate us. With the wounded securely on the stretchers, we began our arduous journey. The desert stretched out before us, vast and unyielding, its beauty marred by the violence that had just unfolded. After trekking approximately 10 grueling miles through the rugged canyon, our weary group finally emerged onto the open desert. We trudged alongside the highway, a desolate stretch where no vehicles dared to travel. The heat was oppressive, its intensity unrelenting, as we took turns carrying our wounded comrades, our strength waning with every step. As dusk began to blanket the sky, we were on the verge of setting up camp, when a flicker of lights in the distance caught our attention. In the heart of the desert stood a solitary structure. Drawing closer, we found ourselves before an old, yet beautifully crafted Arab stone house. It was a two-story building with a small courtyard in front, and the doors stood invitingly open, illuminated by the warm glow of lights inside. I recognized it as a typical Syrian tavern, a haven for travelers braving the desert's harshness. The house featured a central courtyard enclosed by high walls, offering a secluded sanctuary. A fountain adorned its center, surrounded by lush greenery, a serene oasis amidst the sweltering desert. We cautiously entered the courtyard, where I noticed a bell next to the door. Ringing it, we were soon greeted by the house's owner. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with a well-groomed beard and dark hair, slightly tinged with gray. His skin was weathered from the Syrian sun, giving him a rugged yet wise appearance. Dressed in traditional garb, a flowing robe and a taqiyya, he exuded a welcoming aura. He introduced himself as Muhammad. We explained our need for a room, water, and clean bandages to tend to our wounded. Muhammad's gaze swept over us, pausing briefly on the government officials. Then he nodded and soon returned with the requested items. We tended to the wounds, thankfully minor, and Muhammad then offered us a meal. The food was simple but nourishing: unleavened bread, olives, laban, a thick sour milk believed to have healing properties, and Arab sandwiches, flatbreads filled with finely chopped onion, parsley, and bits of meat. We ate gratefully and thanked our host. He nodded in response and showed us to our rooms. The government officials took one room while our squad divided among the remaining two. Soon, a peaceful quiet settled over the house. After everyone else had drifted off to sleep, I told Lieutenant Smith, who was on watch, that I wanted to explore the surroundings. Stepping outside into the cool night air, I felt a refreshing change from the day's blistering heat. The sky was a tapestry of stars, offering a moment of tranquility. I decided to walk around the house. As I rounded a corner, I stumbled upon a small grove of trees with a well at its center. Curious, I approached the well and peered inside. It was too dark to see the bottom, so I pulled out my flashlight and shined it down. To my horror, at the bottom lay a body that had clearly been there for some time. But what chilled me to the bone was the realization that the corpse belonged to Muhammad, the tavern owner I had just met. Gripping my rifle tightly, I rushed back to the rooms. Checking on my squad first, I found nothing amiss. However, upon entering the government official's room, I was met with a shocking scene. Muhammad stood in the center, staring at one of the officials who was pointing a gun at him. As I entered, Muhammad turned his head slightly towards me, then began to shake violently. His body contorted in unnatural ways, bones cracking and reshaping under his skin. The sight was both fascinating and horrifying. First, his face elongated, the jaw stretching forward, the skin rippling and contorting as if something underneath was struggling to break free. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now glowed with a feral yellow light, deep and wild. His mouth widened, lips tearing at the seams to accommodate the growing sharp teeth that emerged, dripping with saliva. The transformation was not just confined to his face. His limbs lengthened and thickened, muscles bulging and expanding in a grotesque display of power. His fingers elongated into claws, tearing through the fabric of his traditional robe. The sound of his clothing ripping was drowned out by the guttural growls emanating from his throat. His spine arched unnaturally as coarse, dark fur sprouted all over his body, covering him in a thick, animalistic pelt. The once stooped figure of a middle-aged man was now replaced by a hulking, beastly form, towering over everyone in the room. As the transformation completed, the creature that stood before us was a terrifying sight to behold. A werewolf, a mythical being of strength and primal fury. It snarled, revealing a row of razor-sharp teeth, its eyes scanning the room with predatory hunger. The man we had known as Muhammad was gone, replaced by this monstrous entity, a creature of nightmares come to life. The official opened fire, and I quickly ducked for cover, so you don't get caught in the crossfire. The creature, now monstrous in form, lunged at one of the officials, biting deep into his throat. The others continued to fire, but their bullets seemed to have little effect. In a panic, they fled the room, leaping over me in their haste, except for one. The monster grabbed his leg, tearing into him with ferocious bites. Frozen in shock, I watched the gruesome scene unfold before regaining my senses and opening fire. Hearing the shots, the rest of my squad rushed in and joined the fray. The beast, agile and seemingly impervious to our bullets, leaped across the walls before smashing through a window and escaping into the night. Silence fell over the house, a haunting stillness that lingered long after the creature's departure. We inspected the victims of the attack, but unfortunately, they had succumbed to their injuries. Fear was evident in the eyes of every member of my squad as we looked around. We decided to barricade ourselves in a room until help arrived. According to the schedule, it should have been soon. I checked the GPS tracker. It was working perfectly. I sighed, overwhelmed by the day's shocking developments. While my subordinates were setting up inside, I decided to survey the surroundings, taking Lieutenant Smith with me. We left the house, scanning the area, aware that the creature could be lurking anywhere. The darkness was on its side. We circled the fountain, and were heading towards the exit when a person emerged from around the corner of the fence. We quickly raised our weapons. It was Mr. Jefferson. He sighed with relief upon seeing us and approached. We kept our guns aimed at him, instructing him to raise his hands. Initially surprised, he then understood the situation and complied. I asked him to state his name, and he responded. Then I asked him to say my name. His answer was correct, but we weren't sure if the creature couldn't mimic memories. Mr. Jefferson then approached us, claiming he was indeed himself. I grabbed him by the collar and demanded to know what was happening. Up to this point, I had been silent and hadn't asked him about the creature since we were in a hurry to leave the area, but now he needed to explain. He gently freed himself from my grip and, sighing, began his story. They had received a message that locals had found a strange place, something like a tomb or burial site. When they arrived, they found this creature. It was something unreal, supernatural, belonging to no known species. It lay still as if dead, but upon taking samples, they realized it was still alive. They theorized that this creature might be the very ghoul from Arabian legends. The project was quickly classified, and they set up a camp near Palmyra to study it. They conducted experiments on it, trying to understand its nature. They did everything with it, but the creature had incredible regenerative abilities. This intrigued them even more. But then they began to notice signs of the creature awakening. A finger twitched, and when one of the workers saw this, he panicked, understandably, as we ourselves had seen how terrifying the monster was. Soon, when they continued their experiments, the creature opened one eye, surveyed each of them, and then closed it again. In shock, they realized it was time to transport the creature to a more secure and fortified location. Unfortunately, the area where the camp was located was in a no-fly zone due to terrorists controlling the airspace, making it dangerous to move by air. So, they decided to transport it to Deir ez-Zor, and from there to our military base. It was decided to attract as little attention as possible and transport it with a small squad. But apparently, someone leaked information about the cargo, though they did not know what we were transporting. As he finished his story, everything fell into place. The puzzle was complete. I began to process what had happened and let my guard down. I didn't notice when someone approached us. It was the last of Mr. Jefferson's surviving colleagues. His face was frightened, and he looked around nervously. Mr. Jefferson, relieved to see him alive, said, "I'm glad you're alive, Jake," and went to pat his shoulder when Jake suddenly swung his hand, and Mr. Jefferson's head rolled onto the floor. I screamed and, raising my rifle, started shooting at the creature. Lieutenant Smith joined in, but the creature, having transformed back into the monster, swiftly jumped to the side and disappeared into the bushes. We kept fearing as other soldiers came running out, but we ceased fire. Standing in the darkness, with only the diav light from the lamps illuminating the small courtyard, we were tense, scanning our surroundings. Suddenly, the creature leaped out of the bushes from the other side, flying towards me. Lieutenant Smith, fortunately reacting in time, hit the creature's side with his rifle butt. It saved me. The creature only managed to scratch me. A thin stream of blood trickled down my cheek. The creature flipped in midair and landed skillfully on its hind legs. It then looked at us and was about to attack again when the roar of a helicopter sounded in the sky, and the lights of vehicles approached the inn. Backup had finally arrived. The creature noticed this and roared in frustration, then jumped, grabbed Mr. Jefferson's body, and disappeared into the night. We continued to shoot, but to no avail. We stood in shock, trying to digest what had happened. The realization came to me. This creature wanted to avenge those who had awakened it and experimented on it. Now it had vanished into the night, and we would likely never find it again.
Story 4.
The call came on a Friday. As the last rays of the sun dyed the sky in hues of crimson and gold, my partner Harry and I were navigating down an unassuming country road. This road, a winding serpent through the heart of rural America, was flanked on both sides by a juxtaposition of dense, shadowy forests and expansive, barren clearings. It was as if nature itself couldn't decide whether to embrace the wild or succumb to emptiness. Birds, a vibrant contrast to the dullness around, fluttered and danced in the air, their chirps a sporadic symphony that momentarily lifted the monotony of our journey. "Frank, what do you think they've lost this time?" Harry's voice broke the silence, his tone a mix of curiosity and weariness. I glanced at him briefly before returning my gaze to the road. "They say someone stole their horses," I replied, my voice steady despite the growing unease. "And again, no signs of a break-in. It's becoming a disturbing pattern." Harry nodded, his eyes reflecting deep thought. "Let's recount. First their cat vanished, then several birds and pigs," he mused, ticking off each incident on his fingers. "How many times have our guys been out there, only to return with more questions than answers? Big Sam is convinced the owners might have a hand in these disappearances." "Yeah, it's odd, no doubt about it," I agreed, feeling the grip of the steering wheel tighten under my hands. "Well, here's our chance to delve into this mystery and unearth some truths." The farm soon came into view, a typical sight in this part of the country, but somehow different in the evening light. It was encircled by vast fields and weathered barns, standing as a sentinel amidst the rural landscape. But something about it, perhaps the way the red rays of the setting sun painted it in a bloody hue, gave it an almost oppressive atmosphere. A shiver ran down my spine as I parked the car. I stepped onto the creaking porch and rapped on the door, the sound echoing eerily in the surrounding silence. There was no response. A second knock, firmer this time, and suddenly a white blur shot out from the shadows. I instinctively leaped back, my hand reaching for the pistol at my side. It took a moment to realize that the supposed threat was just a small white dog, its fur as pale as moonlight. But its eyes, they glowed an unnatural, eerie red, like embers in a dying fire. Embarrassment washed over me as I holstered my pistol. The dog, still snarling softly, watched me with an intensity that felt almost human. It was then I noticed the speed at which it had appeared, too fast for any ordinary dog. My reaction, though initially shameful, seemed justified. Harry and I exchanged a glance, an unspoken agreement that something was amiss. It was then the owner emerged, a woman in her 50s, Lily Mitchell, her stature small but her presence formidable. Her face, marked by the trials of rural life, carried a weariness that seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. She ushered us into the living room, where her husband sat, a burly figure with a gaze as sullen as the gathering dusk. His greeting was nothing more than a curt nod before he returned to his brooding silence. Mrs. Mitchell, with an apologetic whisper, explained her husband's distant behavior and offered to guide us to the horse pen. As we walked through the house, I couldn't help but notice the walls adorned with photographs. They depicted happier times, the Mitchell family with a young man, his smile a stark contrast to the current somber mood of the house. "Who's this?" I asked, gesturing towards the photos. "Our son," Mrs. Mitchell replied, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with sorrow. "He passed away recently, a tragic hunting accident. They found his body torn apart by some wild animal. The forensic team couldn't identify the predator." Her words hung heavily in the air, a tangible presence of grief and mystery. Understanding dawned on me then, an awareness of the source of the farm's mournful aura. We continued in silence to the barns, the final known location of the missing horses. Suddenly, a chorus of barks erupted to our right. 4 large dogs came bounding towards us, their tails wagging energetically, a stark contrast to the grim atmosphere that enveloped the farm. The 4 dogs, upon hearing their owner's sharp command, reluctantly trotted back to their kennel, their tails tucked between their legs. Harry and I started with the barn, a structure that stood stoically against the backdrop of the fading day. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of hay and the ghost of animal presence. We scrutinized every corner, every shadow, but found nothing. The lock on the barn door was untouched, its integrity unbroken. It was as if the horses had dissolved into the air, leaving behind a void filled only with questions. We grilled Mrs. Mitchell about the previous disappearances. Her answers painted a pattern as predictable as it was baffling. Each evening, the animals were there. By morning, they had vanished without a trace. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of a break-in, nothing. The survey of the farm's perimeter took us through a landscape that seemed frozen in time. The fields lay barren, a stark contrast to the encroaching wildness of the forest's edge. As we walked, the farm's isolation became increasingly apparent, a lone island in a sea of untamed nature. Our path eventually led us to the forest's edge. It was here that I felt an inexplicable urge to look back. The sight that met my eyes was unnerving. The 4 Mitchell dogs stood in a line, their bodies rigid, their eyes fixed on us. There was something profoundly unsettling about their silent vigil. "It's the silence," Harry finally said, breaking the eerie calm. "It's unnatural. There's no sound of birds, no hum of insects, not even the rustle of the wind through the trees." His voice carried a note of unease that mirrored my own feelings. As I tuned into the surroundings, the absence of natural sounds was unnerving. The silence felt like a heavy blanket, smothering all signs of life. But then, a rustling noise broke the stillness. We looked up in unison to see a pair of glowing red eyes peering at us from the dense foliage. "A missing cat, maybe?" I ventured, more to break the tension than out of belief. Harry could only offer a non-committal shrug. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the creature vanished, its agile movements carrying it from tree to tree. Its identity remained a mystery, cloaked by the forest's dense canopy. We decided to head back to the farmhouse, a decision hastened by the unsettling encounter. Inside, I brought up the cat sighting to Mrs. Mitchell. She shook her head sadly, confirming it was one of the first animals to disappear. "So, all that's left are the dogs?" I asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Yes," she replied, a hint of sorrow in her voice. "The 4 big ones have been with us since they were puppies. And little Mabel, the white one with the red eyes, she came to us just after our son passed away. She's been such a comfort." I pressed further. "Did the dogs act differently on the nights of the disappearances? Any unusual behavior?" "No," she answered, her gaze distant. "They were as quiet as the nights themselves." With no new leads and the daylight fading, we decided it was time to leave. We thanked the Mitchells and assured them we would return with more resources. As I climbed into the driver's seat, my eyes inadvertently met those of the white dog, Mabel, her red eyes staring out from the window. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and I quickly turned the ignition. The drive back was filled with an uneasy silence. Harry was the first to break it. "That place, it's got a bad vibe, wouldn't you say?" he asked. I nodded, my mind racing. "Yeah, the owner's distant demeanor, the dogs, especially Mabel with those haunting red eyes." Then it hit me, the red eyes in the forest. A sense of dread washed over me, a premonition that we were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Without a word, I slammed on the brakes and turned the car around, heading back to the farm at full speed. "What's going on?" Harry asked, startled by my sudden decision. I didn't answer, my focus solely on the road ahead, racing back to the farm as night began to envelop the sky. The moment we arrived back at the Mitchell farm, a sense of dread washed over me. Without hesitation, I grabbed my pistol, feeling its familiar weight grounding me in the unfolding chaos. We burst into the house, our movements rapid, fueled by adrenaline and fear. The interior was silent, unsettlingly so, as if the house itself was holding its breath, bracing for the horrors that lay just beyond our sight. I made my way to the back door, my partner Harry right on my heels. The air felt thick, charged with an ominous energy that seemed to seep from the very walls of the farmhouse. As I reached for the door handle, a cold shiver ran down my spine, an instinctual warning of the nightmare that awaited us outside. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Time seemed to slow as the scene before us unfolded in a macabre display. The 4 dogs, previously ordinary creatures, were now engaged in a ghastly feast upon 2 human bodies. The corpses were unrecognizable, torn and mangled in a way that spoke of a violence beyond comprehension. Just a few feet away from this grotesque banquet, a pentagram was crudely drawn onto the earth, its lines smeared and uneven. Around it, candles burned with a sickly light, casting long, twisted shadows that danced across the nightmarish tableau. The dogs looked up as the door swung open, their eyes glowing a demonic red. They didn't snarl or growl. Instead, they wore what could only be described as a smile, a twisted, chilling distortion of what should have been a comforting, familiar expression. The thought flashed through my mind, surreal and bizarre. Since when could dogs smile like that? Before I could process the thought further, Harry nudged me from behind. My training kicked in, and I started shooting, aiming for the monstrous canines. But they moved with an unnatural agility, darting and weaving like shadows, dodging every bullet. Harry joined in, his gunshots echoing mine, but our efforts were futile against their preternatural swiftness. Then, a searing pain shot through my leg. Looking down in horror, I saw Mabel, her mouth grotesquely enlarged, latched onto my leg. I fired directly at her, the gunshots ringing in my ears, but she seemed impervious to the bullets. In a desperate move, Harry used his taser on her, and with a final convulsive shudder, she released her grip, taking a piece of my flesh with her. She retreated, her eyes still fixed on us with an ungodly intelligence, as she slowly chewed on the flesh, emitting sounds that were anything but canine. Harry, his face pale and set in a grim line, dragged me back inside the house. He secured the door just as the dogs began to hurl themselves against it, their bodies thudding with sickening thumps. But they couldn't breach it. A moment later, a single, commanding bark cut through the air, and an eerie silence descended. Bleeding and in shock, I leaned heavily on Harry as he helped me to the car. We locked ourselves inside, the safety of the vehicle feeling like a fragile barrier against the horrors outside. As we waited for backup, the night seemed to press in around us, heavy with unseen threats. When help finally arrived, the medics immediately tended to my wound. Harry, along with the arriving officers, went back to investigate the scene, only to return with baffling news. The bodies, the dogs, the pentagram, all had vanished without a trace. The only evidence that anything had occurred was my bleeding leg. As the medic examined the wound, he voiced his confusion. "Are you sure this was a dog bite?" he asked, scrutinizing the jagged, torn flesh. "It looks more like a human or maybe a primate bite." Drained of energy and overwhelmed by the surreal events, I managed a weak response. "Well, it definitely wasn't a cat."
Story 5.
When I was 6, my world revolved around the simple joys of childhood. My parents, passionate about their travels, often embarked on journeys to distant lands, leaving me in the care of my grandmother. This arrangement never bothered me. I loved my grandmother dearly. She was the epitome of kindness and warmth, always ready to spoil me with her homemade treats and captivating stories, her eyes twinkling with unspoken wisdom and adventures of yore. Grandma lived in a quaint, somewhat isolated suburb, snugly situated at the forest's fringe. It was a place where the modern world seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural, a harmonious coexistence of urban comforts and untamed wilderness. The journey from our house to hers was a scenic hour's drive, winding through lush landscapes and sleepy towns, a transition from the bustling city life to the serene embrace of nature. We arrived at her abode around noon, the sun casting playful shadows through the towering trees that bordered her property. Her house, an old Victorian structure, stood majestically against the backdrop of the woods, its wooden exterior weathered yet welcoming. The porch, adorned with potted plants and a couple of rocking chairs, exuded a homely charm. There, a ginger cat, a regular fixture, lay sprawled in lazy elegance on one of the chairs. His fur glowed like burning embers under the sun's caress. As we approached, he lifted his head, regarding us with an almost discerning gaze, as if assessing our intentions. His demeanor amused me greatly, prompting me to dash towards him and engulf him in an affectionate embrace. He initially wriggled in protest, but sensing my harmless intent, he soon relaxed into my arms, purring softly. My mother's call redirected my attention, and we proceeded indoors. The moment we stepped in, the familiar scent of cinnamon and old books enveloped us, a signature fragrance of Grandma's house. The interior was a cozy collage of antique furniture, family portraits, and hand-knitted throw blankets. From the living room emerged Grandma, her smile as warm as the summer sun, her arms open in a welcoming embrace. She was a petite woman, her hair a cascade of silver waves, her face lined with the gentle creases of time and laughter. Behind her, in a peculiar procession, trailed a variety of cats. They were of different breeds and colors, some with sleek coats, others fluffy, all moving with an air of dignified nonchalance. The sight was both amusing and bewildering. I attempted to count them, my focus wavering as I reached 11. My mother, observing this feline parade, couldn't hide her surprise and inquired about their sudden proliferation. Grandma chuckled lightly, brushing off the query with a wave of her hand. She referred to them as her guests, suggesting a certain transience in their stay. Yet their comfortable demeanor around the house hinted at a more permanent residency. After my mother, with a lingering look of bemusement, had left, Grandma and I embarked on the task of feeding our furry companions. She prepared a large pot of porridge, explaining that it was both economical and nutritious for the cats. The kitchen, a realm where Grandma reigned supreme, was a warm, inviting space filled with the aromas of spices and herbs, the walls adorned with copper pots and pans, and recipe books stacked in haphazard piles. She retrieved an assortment of bowls, 13 in total. All were identical in shape but varied in designs, painted with intricate patterns and vibrant colors, except for one which was noticeably larger and plainer. We arranged the bowls meticulously on a long, rectangular wooden table, its surface worn smooth from years of use. The bowls formed 2 neat rows of 6, with the large one positioned solemnly at the head. Grandma, with a certain ceremonious air, took a small brass bell from the windowsill and rang it. The sound, clear and melodic, seemed to resonate throughout the house. Instantly, the cats appeared from their various hideouts, their movements swift and purposeful. Each cat, with an almost rehearsed precision, took its place beside a bowl, their eyes following Grandma's every move. The last to enter was the ginger cat from the porch. He moved with a regal, unhurried gait, his tail held high. He seated himself at the head of the table, in front of the largest bowl, and surveyed his subjects with a benign authority. As he began to eat, the others followed suit, the room filling with the soft sounds of purring and lapping. I watched in fascination, my young mind intrigued by this orderly display. Turning to Grandma, I asked if the ginger cat was their leader. She nodded, a mysterious smile playing on her lips, and said, "In a way, yes. He's more of a patriarch among them. They respect him, and he looks after them in his own way." The cats ate in harmonious silence, each waiting for their turn to approach the water bowl after their meal. Once the feeding ritual was complete, the cats, one by one, gracefully exited the kitchen, disappearing into various nooks of the house. The ginger cat lingered a moment longer, his gaze meeting mine, as if imparting some ancient feline wisdom before he too vanished into the shadows of the hallway. A week had passed in the quietude of Grandma's house, a week where the mundane began to weave with the mysterious. Aside from the ritualistic feeding of the cats, I had started to notice other peculiarities that seemed to defy explanation. The first was the scent. In stark contrast to my friend's aunt's home, where the presence of just 5 cats was announced by an unmistakable odor, Grandma's house was a sanctuary of fresh scents. It was a puzzle, given her numerous feline companions. The air was always crisp, infused with the gentle fragrances of chamomile and mint, as if the house itself was part of a vast, well-tended garden. Then, there was the ginger cat, my favored companion among the feline assembly. I found solace in his company, often engaging in long play sessions, or simply sitting with him, feeling the comforting weight of his body against mine. One incident, in particular, stood out. Walking near a house known for its ferocious dog, I found myself in a harrowing situation. The dog, upon noticing me, erupted into a frenzy of barks and leaps, managing to clear the fence and charge in my direction. My heart raced as I scrambled up the nearest tree, narrowly escaping its snapping jaws. Clinging to the branches, I was paralyzed with fear, my mind racing for a way out of this predicament. It was then that I noticed the ginger cat, perched nonchalantly on a nearby branch. His presence was both a surprise and a comfort. As the dog continued its aggressive display below, something extraordinary happened. Once its eyes met with the cat's, the once fierce creature transformed. It whimpered, tail tucked, and retreated in a display of submission I would have thought impossible. I was left in stunned silence, saved by the very cat I had come to adore. This event deepened the mystery surrounding him, elevating him from a mere pet to something akin to a guardian in my young eyes. But it was not just his daytime demeanor that intrigued me. Nightly, as the clock neared midnight, he would disappear. His nightly excursions were a source of intrigue and speculation. Where could he possibly go every night with such regularity? The summer days drifted by, marked by a sense of tranquility and the comforting routine at Grandma's. However, this peace was abruptly shattered when Grandma fell ill. The doctor's visit and his advice for bed rest filled the house with a sense of urgency and concern. I noticed the cats seemed to share in this sentiment, their behavior more subdued, their movements slower, as if in respect for Grandma's condition. Then came the night when, at 11:30 p.m., the cats, as if heeding an unspoken signal, gathered and silently filed out of the house. Compelled by a mix of concern and curiosity, I decided to follow them into the night. The procession of cats moved with a mysterious purpose, forming a delicate chain as they crossed the garden and approached the rear gate leading into the forest. With agile leaps, they cleared the gate. I cautiously opened it and followed, my heart thumping in my chest. As we entered the woods, darkness enveloped us like a thick, impenetrable shroud, as if we had passed through an invisible barrier. Fear gripped me, but noticing the silhouettes of the cats starting to fade into the distance, I hurried to catch up. We traveled for what seemed like 20 minutes, the forest alive with eerie sounds that heightened my sense of foreboding. To my left, a continuous, soft, yet desperate squealing emanated, sending chills down my spine. The urge to turn back was strong, but curiosity propelled me forward. Suddenly, the dense forest gave way to a clearing. I didn't dare venture further. Instead, I concealed myself in the nearest bushes and peered out. What I saw next was beyond comprehension. The cats, standing on their hind legs in a display of unnatural agility, were dragging branches and twigs to the center of the clearing. Others were digging small pits, and I soon realized they were creating a circle with intricate patterns within it. From the opposite side of the clearing, a larger group of cats emerged, carrying a massive cauldron, seemingly filled with some unknown liquid. They placed it at the center of the circle on a bed of stones and began to pile more wood underneath. Then, a lone cat began to meow, a haunting melodic sound that soon escalated into a chorus as the others joined in. Suddenly, as if by some enchantment, a flame ignited beneath the cauldron. A few of the cats, still standing on their hind legs, began to circle the cauldron in a dance-like motion. I glanced around and realized that the darkness had deepened, the howls and cries from outside the clearing growing more intense. As I turned my attention back to the cauldron, I could see it beginning to boil, the cats around it meowing louder and dancing more fervently, as if entering a trance. The wind picked up, howling in harmony with the sounds of the forest, the atmosphere charged with an otherworldly energy. I cowered, covering my head, yet my eyes remained fixed on the cauldron. From its bubbling depths, something began to emerge, slow and deliberate. It appeared to be a hand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene before me. Was this some sort of feline ritual, a gathering steeped in ancient, forgotten lore? The cat's behavior, so at odds with anything I had ever seen or heard of, suggested a deeper, perhaps darker connection to the forest and its hidden secrets. The wind continued to howl, the trees swaying violently, as if in response to the cat's chant. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, the boundary between reality and the supernatural blurring. The sight of the hand rising from the cauldron was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a manifestation of something ancient and powerful. The cat's dance grew more intense, their meows a cacophony that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the forest. I felt an overwhelming sense of being part of something ancient, a witness to a ritual that transcended time and understanding. The grotesque hand rising from the cauldron was slick and glistening, its long, twisted claws resembling the barren branches of a dead tree. The sight held me in a macabre trance, each second intensifying my fear. My mind raced with ghastly images of what creature could possess such a horrifying limb. The desire to flee was overwhelming, yet I was rooted to the spot. my eyes unable to tear away from the mystical scene unfolding before me. In the midst of my petrified state, a sharp sensation on my leg jolted me back to reality. Frightened, I turned to see the familiar ginger cat, his commanding presence in stark contrast to the chaos around us. He scratched insistently, then circled, a clear signal that he wanted my attention. Seemingly understanding the grave danger we were in, he gently grabbed the hem of my dress with his teeth and tugged, urging me to follow him. This act of urgency from the cat broke the spell that had been holding me captive. I slowly got to my feet, my body trembling, and began to follow him. However, the pull of the surreal ceremony was strong. I cast one final, fateful glance back at the cauldron. To my horror, more of the creature had emerged, a portion of its head, revealing a solitary, wandering eye. The eye, large and unblinking, roved around as if scanning its surroundings, assessing the ritual. I stood frozen, the sight of that solitary, ever-moving eye etching itself into my memory. The urgency in the ginger cat's behavior brought me back to my senses. I hastened my pace, following him as we retraced our steps through the foreboding forest. The night around us was alive with sinister howls and whispers, the shadows seeming to move with a life of their own. I could feel the presence of unseen creatures, their glowing eyes briefly visible before disappearing into the darkness. My heart raced with every step, but I forced myself to focus solely on the cat leading me, my beacon in the enveloping gloom. After what felt like an eternity, we crossed an invisible barrier, and the oppressive atmosphere of the forest lifted. The night, once filled with terror, now seemed almost serene under the moon's gentle glow. I collapsed onto the cool, damp grass, my body shaking from the ordeal. Lying there, the events of the night replayed in my mind like a nightmarish tapestry, while the ginger cat sat beside me, seemingly unfazed by our harrowing experience, methodically licking its paw. Once I gathered my strength, I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with haunting visions. Morning's light brought a shocking surprise. Grandma, who had been so ill the night before, was now the picture of health. Her recovery seemed nothing short of miraculous. I questioned her about the sudden change, and she replied with a nonchalance that suggested an ordinary recovery. I couldn't help but wonder if her sudden improvement was linked to the previous night's events. Eager for answers, I shared my experience with her, describing every chilling detail. She listened with a dismissive smile, suggesting it was all a figment of my imagination, a dream conjured by a worried mind. As we talked, the cats entered the room, each finding a spot to settle comfortably. The ginger cat leaped onto my bed, his gaze shifting between me and Grandma. It was then I noticed something alarming in his eyes, a wild, hungry look that sent shivers down my spine. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if Grandma's recovery was a temporary reprieve? What if the creature in the cauldron was still biding its time, its hunger yet to be sated? The connections between these events began to form a terrifying pattern in my head. As realization dawned, fear gripped my heart, and an involuntary scream escaped my lips.
Story 6.
This diary was discovered by hikers on August 10, 2019 in the forest. It is still unknown what happened to its owner. June 15th. Dear Diary, today, I embarked on a journey, one that lured me into its embrace with a promise of solitude and serenity. As I write this, the dim light of my lantern casts elongated shadows on the walls of my small tent, and I can't help but feel a mix of excitement and an unexplainable sense of foreboding. I've always sought refuge in the depths of the forest. It's been a sanctuary, a place where the cacophony of the world fades into a symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. This time, my destination was a trail hidden in the heart of the national park, whispered about by locals but seemingly untouched by the throngs of tourists that visit the other parts of the park. My day started with the familiar ritual of preparation. I meticulously packed my backpack, ensuring I had all the essentials: water, food, a first aid kit, and of course my trusty diary. Breakfast was a simple affair, just a bowl of oatmeal and a steaming cup of black coffee, the kind that clears your head and sharpens your senses. Leaving my small cozy apartment, I drove towards the park, the city's noise fading into a serene silence as I ventured deeper into the wilderness. The trailhead was not marked. It was as if nature herself had conspired to keep it a secret, a path meant only for those who truly respected her. As I stepped onto the trail, I was immediately enveloped by the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a fragrance that always seemed to calm my restless soul. My hiking boots crunched on the carpet of fallen leaves, each step a steady beat in the quiet of the forest. The trees stood tall and majestic, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a kaleidoscope of light and shadow that danced on the forest floor. I took my time, absorbing every detail, every nuance of the woods around me. I found a clearing and decided to set up camp as the light began to fade. The process was familiar and comforting, but I couldn't ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the sense that something unseen lingered just beyond the veil of trees. June 16th. Dear Diary, as dawn broke, I awoke to the eerie silence of the forest, a stark contrast to the gentle chirping of birds I'm accustomed to. The air was cool and moist, sending a shiver down my spine as I crawled out of my sleeping bag. Breakfast was a simple affair, a granola bar and a few sips of water from my flask. I packed my tent with meticulous care, ensuring every item was in its place. There's a comfort in routine, even more so in a place as unpredictable as this. The further I ventured, the more the forest seemed to transform. The trees grew taller, their thick canopies intertwining to form a natural vault that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was like stepping into another world, one where the rules of nature were rewritten by shadow and silence. My backpack, filled with supplies for the journey ahead, weighed heavily on my shoulders. Inside were my essentials: a small cooking stove, extra clothing, a flashlight, and, of course, my diary. I felt a strange comfort knowing I had everything I needed to survive. Yet a nagging sensation told me there were things in these woods that no amount of preparation could account for. As I trudged along the barely visible path, the silence of the forest was almost tangible. It was as if the dense canopy above swallowed every sound, leaving a void that was filled only by the occasional creak of a branch or the distant rustle of an unseen creature. It felt like walking through a dream, ethereal and disorienting. Lunch was a brief affair, a sandwich I had packed earlier, now slightly squashed but still edible. I sat on a feline log, listening to the silence, trying to discern any sign of life. But there was nothing, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. The shadows in the forest seemed to have a life of their own. They danced at the edges of my vision, forming shapes that vanished when I turned to look directly at them. It was a trick of the light, I told myself, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something lurking just out of sight. As the day wore on, I found myself growing more uneasy. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified, as if the forest was whispering secrets meant only for me. My thoughts turned to tales of old, stories of spirits and creatures that roamed woods such as these, unseen by human eyes. As evening approached, I set up camp in a small clearing. The process was now familiar: pitching the tent, gathering wood for a small fire, preparing a simple meal of canned soup and bread. Yet, the routine did nothing to ease the growing sense of dread. Night in the forest was a different world altogether. The darkness was complete, a blackness so deep it felt like a physical presence. I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of the night, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. It was irrational, I knew, but the fear was real as the beating of my heart. June 17th. The day began with the usual routines that now framed my existence in these woods. I boiled water on my small camping stove for a cup of instant coffee, its bitter taste a comforting reminder of normalcy. Breakfast was a packet of instant oatmeal, eaten quickly as I packed up my camp. The simple acts of rolling up my sleeping bag and folding the tent had become meditative, a moment of calm before the unknowns of the day. As I walked, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees, tall and foreboding, cast long, dark shadows that stretched across the path. The air was still, the usual rustling of leaves eerily absent. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, each crunch of leaf and snap of twig echoing in the silence. It was in the late afternoon when I stumbled upon it, a small clearing that seemed out of place amidst the dense foliage. What caught my eye first was a circle of stones laid out in the center of the clearing. They were arranged meticulously, each stone carefully positioned, creating a pattern that felt deliberate, ritualistic. I stepped closer, curiosity overcoming my initial hesitation. The stones were of varying sizes and shapes, but all bore signs of having been handled, their surfaces smooth and worn. The circle was precise, almost unnervingly so, as if it had been laid out with a purpose I couldn't fathom. Scattered around the clearing, I found clumps of animal hair. The hairs were coarse and of different colors. Some were matted and tangled, others lay in neat piles, as if placed there with intention. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if I had stumbled upon a scene from a tale meant to be told in hushed tones around a campfire. The rational part of my mind tried to dismiss it as the work of animals or perhaps a prank by other hikers. But the atmosphere of the clearing was heavy, charged with an energy that felt almost palpable. I recalled stories I'd heard, tales of strange occurrences in remote woods, of rituals and unexplained phenomena. As I left the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease. June 18th. Last night, as I lay in my tent, enveloped in the suffocating darkness of the woods, an unsettling experience shattered the fragile veil of my courage. The night air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. As I tried to sleep, a faint sound caught my attention. Whispers, faint and indistinct as if carried on the breeze from just beyond the edge of the clearing. My heart pounded in my chest, and I lay frozen, straining to catch any coherent words. But it was all in vain. The whispers were a muffled cacophony, a language of shadows and fear. I spent the night in a state of heightened alertness, every sense attuned to the slightest sound. Sleep eluded me, and when dawn finally broke, it was a relief, albeit a weary one. June 19th. This morning, as I prepared to continue my journey, I discovered that my compass, which had been a reliable guide until now, had gone haywire. The needle spun wildly, without any sense of direction, rendering it useless. I felt a surge of panic, a realization of just how reliant I had become on this small instrument for a sense of stability. Attempting to retrace my steps proved futile. The landscape itself seemed to have altered, as if the forest had reshaped itself overnight. Familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by an unrecognizable terrain that twisted and turned in a disorienting dance. As the day wore on, my situation grew increasingly dire. I tried to maintain a straight path, marking trees as I passed, but every time I looked back, the marks seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the forest. My provisions, though carefully rationed, were dwindling. Lunch was a meager affair, a handful of nuts and a few dried fruits. I ate mechanically, my mind consumed by the predicament I found myself in. The silence of the woods was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant rustle that sent shivers down my spine. The feeling of being watched, which had been a mere whisper at the back of my mind, was now a constant presence, an unseen observer in the sea of trees. As evening approaches, I set up camp with hands that tremble slightly, not just from physical exhaustion, but from the growing fear within. The isolation of the forest is weighing heavily on me, a tangible force that threatens to crush my resolve. I'm determined to stay strong, to find my way back to the trailhead and out of this nightmare. But as I sit by my small fire, staring into the flickering flames, I can't help but feel a sense of despair. The forest, with its shifting shadows and unexplained phenomena, seems to be a puzzle with no solution, a maze with no exit. June 20th. The trees surrounding my campsite were no longer just silent sentinels of the forest. They had become canvases for cryptic symbols. These markings, etched deeply into the bark, bore the look of an ancient script, reminiscent of a forgotten civilization. Each symbol was intricate, composed of lines and curves that seemed to hold a meaning far beyond my understanding. The air around me felt unnaturally cold, an icy chill that made my breath visible in puffs, despite it being the height of summer. I stood there, amidst the etched trees, a sense of unease growing within me. June 21st. I've been walking for hours, yet the forest refuses to yield any path to escape. The trees, towering and unyielding, seem to close in around me, their branches intertwining like the bars of a cage. Every step I take feels futile, a march in place in a world that defies all sense of direction and logic. The whispering that once was a faint, distant sound has grown louder, a constant murmur that surrounds me. It's as if the forest itself is speaking in a tongue I cannot comprehend, a symphony of rustling leaves and creaking branches that forms a language of its own. Every sound in the forest sends my heart racing. The crack of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves in the wind, each noise is a jolt of fear, a reminder of my vulnerability in this vast, unknowable wilderness. The sensation of being watched has grown stronger, an oppressive feeling that I can't escape. I've become hyper-aware of my surroundings, my senses stretched to their limits. I catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, but when I turn, there's nothing there, just the endless expanse of trees and shadows. As I sit here writing this, the loneliness of my situation weighs heavily on me. Despite the fear, despite the growing sense of hopelessness, I refuse to give up. I will continue to look for a way out. Tomorrow, I will set out again. June 22nd. Today, in a turn of events that defies logic, I found myself standing once again before the stone circle. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. It was as if the woods were toying with me, leading me in circles, mocking my attempts to escape. As I stood there, surrounded by the ancient stones, the air around me felt charged, heavy with an unspoken menace. The symbols etched into the bark of the surrounding trees seemed to leer at me, a silent reminder of the forest's mysteries and my own growing despair. In my desperation, I tried to leave a trail of markers, small cairns of stones and tied pieces of cloth on branches, hoping to create a path I could follow back. But as I moved forward and looked back, the markers disappeared, as if the forest itself was erasing my efforts, swallowing every attempt to understand or escape its grasp. June 23rd. Today I saw something that has shaken me to my core. As I walked, a fleeting glimpse of a figure caught my attention. It was there among the trees, a presence that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. It moved like a shadow, fluid and elusive, vanishing before I could truly focus on it. The figure was dark, an amalgam of beast and human, a form that defied explanation. The sight of it sent a wave of terror through me, a primal fear that clutched at my heart. As I write this, my hands are shaking, the pen barely steady in my grasp. The encounter has left me feeling more alone, more vulnerable than ever before. The forest, with its whispering trees and shifting shadows, has become a prison, and I am its lone, forsaken inmate. The realization of my helplessness is crushing. I am lost in a place where the rules of the world I know do not apply, where every step takes me deeper into a nightmare that I cannot wake from. June 24th. The whispering has become constant, an unending stream of voices that fill my ears with a cacophony that drowns out all thoughts of hope or escape. The voices are unintelligible, a jumble of sounds that seem to mock my desperation. They rise with the wind, seep through the leaves and echo in the hollows of the trees. At times, the whispers swell into a chorus that seems almost celebratory, as if rejoicing in my torment. They are everywhere and nowhere, a presence that I cannot escape, a reminder of my complete isolation in this cursed place. The shadows among the trees have taken on a life of their own. They grow and shrink, twist and turn, forming shapes that defy the laws of nature. In the dim light of dusk and dawn, I see figures lurking in the periphery of my vision, spectral beings with wolf-like fur, their forms ghostly and indistinct. These apparitions move with a fluid grace, a silent ballet performed for an audience of one. They are both terrifying and mesmerizing, a manifestation of the forest's dark heart. I find myself staring at them, trying to discern some meaning, some purpose behind their presence. I feel my grip on reality slipping, the line between the real and the imagined blurring into obscurity. The forest, with its unending whispering and shifting shadows, has become a crucible, testing the limits of my mind. Sometimes, in moments of desperation, I yell at the apparitions, my voice raw with fear and frustration. Other times, I find myself pleading with them, begging for respite, for some semblance of peace. But my cries go unanswered, lost in the endless whisper of leaves and wind. The creatures, the shadows, the voices, they all seem to be playing a cruel game with me. They feed on my fear, drawing closer, their presence more oppressive with each passing day. It's as if the forest itself is alive, a malevolent entity that delights in my suffering. As night falls, I huddle in my tent, the flimsy fabric offering little protection against the horrors that lurk outside. The darkness is complete, a suffocating blanket that smothers all hope. The whispers grow louder, more insistent, a relentless tide that threatens to sweep me away into madness. I cling to the remnants of my sanity, a drowning man grasping at the last straws of reason. I must find a way out, escape this labyrinth of fear and illusion, but with each passing moment the forest tightens its grip, drawing me deeper into its embrace. June 25th. Today, in a cruel twist of fate, I stumbled upon my own campsite. It was a surreal and disheartening moment, to come face to face with the evidence of my own futile attempts to escape. The sight of the familiar tent, the extinguished fire pit, and my own footprints leading away and back again was like a taunt from the forest, a mocking reminder of my entrapment. The realization that I have been walking in circles hit me with the force of a physical blow. The woods are not just a labyrinth of trees and shadows. They are a maze that warps time and space, a puzzle that defies all logic and understanding. My senses can no longer be trusted. Each shadow, each rustle of leaves feels like a trick, a deception crafted by the forest to lead me further astray. The whispers are now a constant din in my ears, a soundtrack to my unraveling sanity. My body is weak, drained of energy by the relentless stress and the meager rations I have left. My mind feels fractured, splintered by the relentless terror and confusion. The barrier between dreams and wakefulness has crumbled, leaving me in a state where nightmares and reality merge into a single, horrifying existence. Sleep, when it comes, offers no respite. It is a fitful, restless state where the horrors of the forest invade my dreams. I wake from one nightmare into another, a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. Even the act of writing in this diary, once a source of comfort, has become a struggle. My thoughts are disjointed, my handwriting shaky. I write not out of hope, but out of a desperate need to cling to some semblance of normalcy, to prove to myself that I still exist beyond the madness that envelops me. June 28th. Dear Diary, the shadows in the woods, I have come to realize, are not mere ghosts or figments of my imagination. They are sentient beings, intelligent and malevolent. They have been toying with me, erasing my footprints, leading me in endless circles, driving me to the brink of madness. These entities move with purpose, a sinister intelligence guiding their actions. They appear and disappear at will, their forms blending into the darkness of the forest, making them almost impossible to discern. The forest itself, I am convinced, is a living, breathing monster. It consumes those who dare to venture into its depths, feeding on their fear and confusion. I am but its latest victim, a pawn in a game that I never stood a chance of winning. The trees, the shadows, the whispers, they are all part of this malevolent entity. The forest is alive in a way that defies understanding, a predator cloaked in leaves and bark. As I write these words, my body is numb, overwhelmed by a cold that seeps into my bones. My thoughts are a jumbled mess of fear, resignation, and despair. I can feel them coming for me, the shadows, the unseen watchers. There is no escape, no hope of salvation. I am finished, defeated not just by the physical challenges of the forest, but by the psychological torment it has inflicted upon me. All I can do now is express my regrets, the things I left unsaid and undone. I think of Jenny, the love I never declared, the future we'll never have. The pain of that unspoken love is a sharp contrast to the numbness that envelops me. I am pathetic, a man who sought to conquer a force beyond his understanding and failed miserably. If by some chance this journal is found, let it be a warning to anyone who reads these words. Stay away from this forest. It holds secrets and horrors beyond human comprehension, a darkness that swallows the light of reason and sanity. This forest is not a place for the living. It is a domain of shadows and whispers, a realm where the line between the real and the unreal blurs into obscurity.